I'm going to start the Wednesday, June 13th, 2018 meeting of the City Council Rail Committee. City Clerk, if you would please take the roll.
Councilmember Fine.
Here.
Councilmember Holman. Councilmember Koo.
Here.
Councilmember Scharf.
Here.
Chair Wilbach.
Not
Three present.
Thank you. Let's start with oral communications. I have a couple speaker cards. I'm just going to go in the order we got them. Each of you will have 3 minutes. The first speaker is Kathleen Judge.
Good morning. Thank you so much for letting me have a few minutes of your time. My name is Kathleen Judge. I live on the corner of Emerson and Churchill, and I've lived in my home for 10 years. I've lived in the same home, and I'd like to continue to live in this home. I'm here to echo the statements of my neighbors and residents of Old Palo Alto. I'm in full support of our guiding principles, and I think you're familiar with them, presented in our position statement, namely that our projects would provide the best return on invested dollar. Projects would maximize the use of the existing and or underused infrastructure and maintaining pedestrian safety. Finally, which bears little repeating as to the importance for all of us affected, would be maintaining community integrity and absolutely enacting no eminent domain for this rail project. I would like to underscore the absolutely no enactment of eminent domain, thus would be taking off the agenda full or hybrid lowered grade separation. So I'm looking to really underscore that we'd like those issues off the table. The lasting effects of these options has terrible consequences for those of us affected by eminent domain, but also leaves the community in disarray for a number of years, namely traffic and congestion, not to mention what it would do to our community. I'm a nurse at Stanford Hospital and Clinic, so I have lived through this entire construction project of the new hospital. I can only imagine what would happen on Churchill. There's been many iterations, and the construction continues to be prolonged. I know that would absolutely be the same case on Churchill. There's really we don't have a date for when the Stanford project will be done, and I know that would happen on Churchill as well. On a personal level, losing my home to eminent domain prices me absolutely out of Palo Alto. The home directly next to me just sold, the asking price was $4.1 million. I would be forced to relocate to another area of California if I lose my home in Palo Alto. As you can see, it's a personal issue for me. It's also a community issue. So it forces me out of the area. I'd have to find another job. I'd have to find another home outside of this area. And on a community level, the hybrid and the full options destroy the integrity of this neighborhood with lasting traffic congestion for years to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, Nadia Nyack, to be followed by Jason Matloff. Morning, Nadia.
Hi, good morning. So I know this is actually scheduled to be item number 4, but just in case we don't get there today, I just wanted to point out that as we have the first item 1 and item 2 conversations today, the VETA report that you guys had kind of clearly points out the things that we've been saying for a while, which is that the money for Measure B has been proposed to be divided evenly across all the grade separations. So there is not a plan to steal away our money. Measure B has been negotiated so that we all get our fair share. And secondly, Nuria Fernandez of VTA also said that they are working on a plan to leverage the dollars that we could get from VTA. So my guess is that would be SB1, which is the gas tax money. The governor has already used that money to match grade separation projects in Southern California, and I suspect that is the kind of matching that they're talking about. So again, following on this theme that CARD has been talking about for a while, which is that our pot of money is not necessarily just limited to what we have in Measure B, but that there will also be different types of funding from the state that could potentially help fund some of these things. And lastly, just that we have been concerned about deadlines going forward. And while I think we need to obviously continue to move forward and get some answers on the table, maybe a little bit of the pressure that we felt previously, we can take a little bit more of a breather to take the time to do this right, because we're not under the same pressure that we thought before. So I just wanted to frame that conversation. I know we'll talk more about that report later, but just to keep that present in your mind today. Thank you.
Thank you, Nadia. Jason Matloff, to be followed by David Shen and Tom Shannon.
I'm not going to repeat prior discussions of our petition, except to say that I think we're over 450 signatures now for the proposal that you all know about. And obviously, as you know, the proposal says if we can't get a lowered rail, tunnel, or trench citywide, then our proposal is to close Churchill and to fix the obvious problems that are in Embarcadero. Which are, most prominently the fact that there's 3 lanes for a couple hundred yards, despite the fact that for 2 miles it's a 4-lane road, which obviously constrains capacity on the road. And the other major thing is the fact that there is no southbound turning capabilities, which makes the 2 arterial roads, Embarcadero and Alma, impossible to get to, which is kind of ridiculous from a traffic engineering perspective and drives traffic to Churchill. If those were fixed, then we would have the east-west capacity that's needed, or we urge the studying to manage the capacity that's lost in closing Churchill. Now, what I wanted to bring up here, because there's some intentional or unintentional, just maybe some lack of understanding of data that was claimed at the last city council about 9,000 cars that would be displaced onto the neighborhoods in in the Professorville area. And that's factually just totally not true. And I wanted to bring data from our own McDonald study, which very clearly lays this out. Now, in fact, there are 9,000 cars that go through the intersection. That's not disputed. But what is also not true, or what is also true, is that only 25% of that crosses Churchill, and even a much smaller number, less than 900, and these are at the peak hours of the day, less than 900 actually would need to go through in the westbound direction that would be cloverleafed through the Professorville area, which amounts to, if you do the math, 3 to 4 cars a minute, okay? And that's not an enormous amount of traffic. I would urge that, if there's a way to resolve even that would be great, but it's a much smaller cost than any of the other things that we're talking about, eminent domain, $500 million to build underpasses. I mean, just putting these things proportionally in context, they're just not even comparable. So I have 4 copies of this. I've highlighted all the data, done the math for you. It's a ridiculous thing for anyone to claim that there's 9,000 cars that are going to be offset into the Professorville area. I urge you to study this, and I'll hand these documents to the staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Last 2 speakers, David Shen, to be followed by Tom Shannon.
Let me just make sure.
Distinguished Rail Committee members, my name is Dave Shen. I live on Churchill Avenue. As part of the North Old Palo Alto Group, we've been advocating for solutions that do not destroy the integrity and sanctity of our neighborhood, nor reduce the safety of its residents and cyclists. We also advocate for non-eminent domain solutions to preserve our homes. To that end, I ask that we find a way to remove the hybrid options, either regular or reverse, from the list of final options at Churchill Avenue. Either hybrid option would require eminent domain and the placement of a massive concrete structure in the middle of our neighborhood, which would draw vehicle traffic to it, increasing congestion and reducing safety of our residents, and not to forget putting a large, ugly structure in what was once a quiet residential neighborhood. We residents who live there do not want a structure like that in our neighborhood and would highly prefer other solutions with much better cost structures and, quite frankly, better results. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Last speaker on this item, Tom Shannon.
Hey, good morning. Tom Shannon, 256 Kellogg Avenue, 40-year resident in Palo Alto, 30 years in Kellogg. That's a block and a half from the Churchill interchange. And the only reason I'm here today is I also spend a lot of time in Northern Virginia, where the Metro has built a viaduct through Tyson's Corner, impacting both McLean, Virginia, and Fairfax County and Great Falls. And I just want to encourage the committee, if you want to see something that went really wrong, go and visit Tyson's Corner and see the viaduct. It's much higher than at least the proposed viaduct for Palo Alto, but all of my friends and coworkers that are in Tyson's Corner said, we really blew it. We went the cheap route with a viaduct, and now those neighborhoods are incredibly negatively impacted. So I offer that to the committee for a study. And I would be glad to pay for you guys to fly out there and see it. So.
Okay. I'll take you up on that, Tom.
Thank you very much. So that concludes oral communications. We're now going to move on. Excuse me.
Right?
We're now going to move on to our first action item, unless we had any other speakers for oral communications. We're currently, just to be clear, we're on oral communications. This is to speak to something that is not on the agenda. Okay, so actually one more speaker, Barbara Hazlitt, to speak to oral communications.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
No problem at all.
Good morning. My name is Barbara Hazlett. I'm a 38-year resident on Emmer Street, and I and my Professorville and Embarcadero Road neighbors oppose any proposal involving the widening of Embarcadero Road underpass. A widening of the underpass would attract many more thousands of cars along the entire road and encourage more speeding. We understand that NOPA, who is lobbying for the closure of Churchill Avenue, proposed the idea of widening Embarcadero Road undercrossing to offload the traffic from their street. Do the people near Churchill, while understandably wanting to preserve their houses, now want to destroy ours? I think Council realized at the May 29th meeting that there's a substantial portion of Palo Alto that is in opposition with NOPA on this matter. The rail crossing challenge must not pit one neighborhood against another. Instead, we should work together to improve the traffic flow in and through Palo Alto by controlling the amount and type of development. Embarcadero Road sidewalks carry tremendous bicycle and pedestrian traffic. This proposal is a dangerous safety concern and in direct contradiction to the city's comprehensive plan, which aims to make Embarcadero a better, safer multi-mode road. This potentially destroys the most historic section of Palo Alto, Professorville. Importantly, I want to remind the city of the impacts on feeder streets in addition to the impact on Embarcadero. In my reading about whether widening of streets is an answer to congestion, the overwhelming conclusion is no. It makes matters worse, and it is explained by the theory called induced demand, or the Palo Alto transportation staff and consultants incorporating induced travel analysis into their thinking. Even Caltrans admits widening of streets is a losing proposition. Such jurisdictions as the state of Pennsylvania and the city of Los Angeles basically stop building new highways and are diverting resources to upkeep and non-car modes. We, the residents of Professorville and Embarcadero Road, implored you to preserve our neighborhoods and request removing the widening of the Embarcadero underpass as part of the rail crossing initiative. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so that concludes oral communications, and we're now going to move on to our first action item, which is introduction of Eileen Goodwin of Apex Strategies, AECOM team, to discuss community engagement for grade separation alternatives. So we'll turn to staff first.
Thank you.
Then we'll go to a little bit of get any public comments on that item, have some council discussion. And the practice that we've been using for the last several months in this committee is to return to community after some council discussion. So
Great,
we'll allow a second opportunity to speak on that item, just like item 2.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and council members. Long time no see. Looks like we're picking up right where we left off. Thought at the end of the meeting last night on the bike ped plan, of course, we were talking about the challenges and difficulties of designing transportation solutions within very constrained contexts and essentially a kind of built-out city, and the challenges that presents. And some of the commentary we were having at the very end is like really being able to separate bike lanes from the traffic is absolutely would be one of the best solutions. So here we are, wonder of wonders again, talking about the absolute importance of separating the rail traffic, from our existing corridors. So I did want to just say one thing. Our apologies, although I don't really think they're really necessary for the fact that we were not able to get a lot of advanced materials out to the council we're all on sort of short timeframes. 2 weeks ago, we had our last meeting, and I would just remind the committee that we're also in prep for your upcoming meeting next week, right? Tuesday, is that it? On the 19th? The 19th, where the council as a whole, 7 of you at least, will be presumably meeting again to sort of as a council take potential sort of action in some ways based upon what we do here today. So going to have a little bit of this unfolding here in real time with you all, and just ask for your understanding of that reality. Thank you. Rob?
Thank you, Jim. Rob DeGost, Deputy City Manager. And I wanted to just let everyone know, and those in the public, that we have some additional copies in the back of the presentations, if you haven't got them. I also wanted to introduce our AECOM team. We have Eddie Mercurio, who's the project manager, sitting right next to Josh here, and we have Eileen Goodwin from Paccrc Strategies as part of the AECOM team next to Eddie. And that's the first presentation and discussion is on community engagement, which Eileen and I will be working closely together, and pretty excited about it. Eileen is quite an amazing individual in this area, I would have to say. She has 30 years of leadership experience in building consensus and completing complex projects involving many different parties. As Executive Director of the Santa Clara County Traffic Authority, Eileen Goodwin successfully delivered the $1.2 billion Measure A highway improvement program, including building 18 miles of new Highway 85 and widening Highways 101 and 237. Eileen is the principal of Paccrc Strategies, which is part of the AECOM team. She does a terrific job. Her focus is on building consensus and community participation. So we're very excited to have her here, and she's going to provide a presentation on the thinking on community engagement going forward. Hope you'll find it very interesting and look forward to the discussion. Eileen?
How far away do I need to be?
Pretty close.
Pretty close? Okay, is this being streamed? So I have to actually, okay. Well, I just want to say good morning to everybody who's here. I recognize many of you in the audience from other projects that I've worked on that have been involved here in Palo Alto, as well as projects where some of your audience have participated in regional transportation and land use issues. So it's a pleasure to be here. I've already said hello to some longtime friends and acquaintances. So I'm thrilled to be part of the AECOM team, and our PowerPoint really is taken directly from the current draft version of an outreach plan. And so our thought today was to just walk you through the various elements and, quite frankly, assumptions that are in that plan to make sure that those ring true for you and for the folks who may choose to comment. So with that said, I'm going to get right into it. Was that, which one? Oh, use the thing. Okay. I'll get rid of the mouse. I'm a mouse person, so it's always the first place I go. All righty. There we go. The first item I wanted to talk about is the assumptions of roles. And of course, the City of Palo Alto is leading this effort and would of course be the lead for the public involvement. Sometimes on projects that have a regional implication, there's other agencies involved, and in this case, we do have the Caltrain Joint Powers Board. The JPB's role will be to help and assist in technical screening and of course be aware of and participate as part of the technical committee and part of the screening effort, et cetera. But you as the City of Palo Alto are the leaders, and certainly from a community outreach perspective are the point people on community involvement. That said, the actual community members and business members of your community are encouraged to participate, and this plan definitely has been structured to have a lot of participation with the users, neighbors, and business owners in the community to help vet and talk about the various grade separation scenarios and potential projects. So there is definitely a role for everyone. How come that's not advancing? Oh, there we go. There's several goals for the outreach effort, and they include building understanding from the community that they would understand and agree to the problem that is being solved. One thing that Rob didn't mention in introducing me is that Etty and I have teamed on multiple grade separation efforts up and down the Caltrain corridor, and in addition, I've worked on other cities' projects as well. And one of the first things we always try and build is an understanding of the problem that's out there if the do-nothing scenario is chosen, because of growth of the train service on the corridor, it won't be the same as it is today. And so understanding and building on that understanding is one of the goals of the outreach effort. The team would propose ideas and alternatives, and the ultimate solution that's being put out there, and that hopefully we can build the trust from the community and from, quite frankly, your staff and for you on the dais, that we are the right team to do that work. We want to make sure that the process is fair and transparent, and that trade-offs were understood by all parties and acknowledged and considered as various project scenarios are either moved forward or jettisoned along the way. That the community would also understand the funding constraints and opportunities related to solutions and any other ideas, because of course this is not, at least right now, a funded project or projects. And so understanding the implications of various scenarios from a funding perspective and how funding plays into timing is important to get out into the world and have people understand and be able to use as part of the screening. Community members, businesses, and all stakeholders would partner with us as the team to get information, ideas to develop, and that these ideas would satisfy multiple interests. So we're very interested in building that partnership with the community. And the process would develop, hopefully, some preferred alternatives that the community would ultimately help advocate for funding solutions. How are we going to do this? Well, we have a draft plan that relies on a lot of meetings, and there's a variety of meetings. And what I wanted to do is just give you an overview, and then I've got a graphic that I'll put up there that really sort of spells out how these meetings relate to one another over time. So there would be potentially 3 stakeholder meetings. These are seen as larger groups, but not necessarily a full community meeting, and I'll get into some more detail on that. There would be 3 community-wide, more traditional community meetings. There would be city council updates and, of course, rail committee updates. And that there was, as part of this draft plan, and we'll talk about this in just a minute, there's a proposal to have what we're calling a CAP, which is a community advisory panel, and a half a dozen meetings of that group. So this graphic really shows you how these meetings would stack up. As you can see, there's 3 big time frames. One would be late summer to kick off the more public meetings. And then we would have 2 meetings in the fall. The contract that and the proposal process that we have responded to as the AECOM team really envisioned that the decision on the preferred scenario or scenarios would go in front of the council for action in December of 2018. So that's why this is a fairly compressed looking schedule. I did want to also highlight that orange bar across the bottom are some of our other tools to get the word out for people who are maybe folks that don't necessarily want to come physically to a place and participate in a meeting, and I'll go into those, but they are including some online surveys and some other ways that people can engage with the project. So let's dive into this community advisory panel. The current thinking is this would be somewhat around a dozen people, and that this would be a group of people that would meet starting in July, if we could get them assembled that quickly, and again, before the first community meeting in August. The thinking would be, and some of you in the audience I know, including someone definitely who was at a community advisory group that I also facilitate related to the BART Phase 2 project. So the thinking is very similar to that. These people would be representing groups of people, and they would convene themselves in the late afternoons, and they would be advisory to the staff and the project team. And of course, anything that would come out of this group would certainly be made available for the council members to consider prior to any actions that you might take wearing your council hats. The thought is that this group would be liaisons regarding information related to the project, that they would collaborate with the project team, build an understanding of the project, that anyone chosen to sit on this group would make a commitment to regularly attend the meetings, because this is only a half a year process. Hopefully that wouldn't be too onerous, but it's very important that, because people would be building a level of knowledge, that they attend regularly so we can get that two-way dialogue going, and that their group, whoever they're representing, would be represented at all the meetings. That they would come prepared to the meetings, because there'll be background materials, just as you get background materials here, that the expectation would people would have reviewed those and be ready to participate, and that they would feel comfortable being honest participants and giving straightforward feedback to the group so we don't go down the wrong path. The briefings would relate to outreach-related materials, as well as some of the technical areas, as well as regular project updates, which might include topics such as funding. And then the hope would be that this group would turn around after each meeting and make sure that this kind of content got delivered back to their group that they represent. So whether that's a homeowners association or a business group or some other group, the thinking is that this would be a nice way to have people be able to be knowledgeable about the project and expand the knowledge of the project into the community. The stakeholder meetings, these are meetings where, in my experience, some groups, and particularly those that have more of a business bent, or groups that maybe have people who may or may not live in town but are working in town, such as your real estate community. Sometimes those folks don't come out in the evening meetings that would be our community-wide meetings. So the thought might be, if there was a group that was convened that we could go to and present information and get feedback, that there would be an opportunity to do that and be strategic about it, to make sure that all voices had an opportunity to be heard. And so you see there some ideas about who might be on that list. Of course, there's many more people there than we actually have identified. We've identified up to 3, but perhaps some of these meetings could be collapsed. And they may be held at the place where these people already congregate during the day, because again, businesses, especially those that are restaurant oriented, don't come out in evening meetings. Then our more traditional community meetings, we've identified 3 timeframes, and we're looking at sort of the 6 to 8 o'clock timeframe, which we understand is your typical Palo Alto start time. And our first meeting we would hope to hold on August 23rd. We are holding a community room already on that. And this is an interesting assignment for us, because a lot of times Etty and I are starting from the very beginning of a project, and in this case, we're very well aware that you've had a lot of community process and that there was another consultant team, and so we're coming in a little bit in the middle, and so we don't want to bring the community back all the way to the beginning, because we recognize that they've already given you a lot of information. We've been able to look at all that information, so we feel like we can start where the community already is and build on that. So our first meeting, we would propose that we talk about the alternatives that would be, that have been out there that you all have been wrestling with, and maybe the number isn't 10 by the time we get to August, but whatever's still around by then, and we go through and explain the process that has been used to screen the projects thus far, and get ideas about how to continue that screening process. We hope to, again, as you heard me talk about, build an understanding of gate downtime and some of the traffic issues that are out there, and that would certainly be part of the PowerPoint. We would maybe show some videos of some, maybe some less than perfect behavior at some of the grade separation areas that maybe could be mitigated if there was some sort of grade separation put in place. We know that we've seen that in other communities where people get very frustrated with the gate back downtime and they do some crazy things out there. And it's also hoped that perhaps we could engage our first responders to help also inform what the important cross city connections need to be and have the community build on that as they give us feedback. By the second meeting, which we would propose to have sometime in October, we would be looking at the pros and cons of whichever alternatives are still in play there, and the traffic impacts that are specific to those, construction staging, because that's a big issue. Sometimes people are very comfortable with the end product of whatever is being proposed, but the tricky part for them is how do we build it and how long does it take and what are the implications and concerns related to that. So we could talk through construction staging of all the alternatives that would be still on the table in October, and site-specific 3D simulations could be available for public review, and we have used these recently up in the city of Burlingame and in the city of Menlo Park. I mean, literally 3D glasses that people put on, and it really gives you a way to visualize what some of these options might look like as a person standing on the sidewalk, because there are very different implications. There's also 3D animations that AECOM has done where you're flying over and being able to see sort of the whole context of the area. So we would be looking for some sort of graphic visuals that could really help us tell the story in a way that those cross sections and colored up maps don't typically do. And then by our third meeting, our hope is that we would get down to the last, or maybe last one of the preferred scenarios to really run through and start to hone what looks like will be the recommendation that would move forward to the council by the end of the year. And again, playing with those 3D animations, especially if something has changed between the second and third meetings. Additional outreach tools, as I mentioned, are a project fact sheet. This is pretty typical stuff, but very important. This is where we start to put down maybe a version of the graphic that you saw so people can understand the touch points, the purpose of the project, some contact information, and some other project details are as appropriate. As the project moves along in time, it's our thought that we would be updating the project fact sheet regularly, and that the first project fact sheet might make for a nice emailed or mailed document to get out into the world so people kind of see where we are and the new team coming on board. Of course, we'll be working with the city staff on notifications to make sure we have an excellent turnout at any public meetings that we are hosting. You have a very, very good Gov delivery service. You have an existing mailing list. So we'd be just looking to build off of that and also work with some of our community stakeholders such as CARD and others who have their own networks, Friends of Caltrain, et cetera, where they have a great network to get the word out. And Nextdoor, when I do community meetings all over, Nextdoor is usually one of the biggest hand raisers for how do people hear about the meetings. Of course, at our meetings, we'll be having sign-in sheets and comment cards. We were proposing to have a web page that is actually hosted by the AECOM team that's linked from both the Caltrain website as well as the city project website. This allows us to do maybe some things that the city site can't necessarily host. We are looking at trying to do a couple of surveys during the process, and our thought right now on these two surveys is that they would be contemporaneous with the first two community meetings, and that as people come to the community meetings, we might be able to do some engagement through iPhone voting or some sort of technology as we lay out pros and cons and assumptions and get some immediate feedback. And we would have some online version of that for people who maybe couldn't attend the meeting, and that would be up for a time right around that first and second meeting. So we're pretty excited about that. And in other projects, we've had a nice turnout from people going online, and I imagine we would definitely see that here in Palo Alto as well. Part of the scope is for project direct mailings. You've heard me talking about maybe the first one being a project fact sheet, which would be just sort of saying, here we are, here's the information, here's our timeline for participating in person. And then we thought maybe those 2 surveys might have some sort of mail-out version as well to push back content back towards the project team. And then the 4th one, we're thinking is either right before or around the last community meeting where it starts to gel a final alternative that might be going in front of the council, or perhaps it's after that when you do have something that's moving forward, just to make sure people understand that that would be something that the council's voting on and sort of get the word out prior to that final council vote. Some other tools are, of course, your database, which, as I already mentioned, this team would be continuing to work with the city staff to keep current. And then our thought is that there's a hotline, which really we set up for the city staff to take the first phone calls off of, but with the support of the project team to help make sure that those are answered in a timely manner. And then finally, part of our scope is to document everything that we got through this process. So as you move into the next phase, you've got a nice capsule of one place where the public can go and then regulatory agencies could go and your own team, staff, or any new council members can go to understand what materials were used and what the feedback was all the way through this, this process. And with that, I'm finished and happy to take any questions.
Thanks very much for that report. Before we go to the public on this, are there any just really initial quick questions before we get into public and then comments? Okay, let's go to the public. A couple of speakers on this item, Cedric and also Stephen Rosenblum. I think I saw you both last night. Good to see you again.
Yeah, hi, good morning. So I just kind of want to reiterate a little bit of my point that I was trying to make last night when my time was cut off. I'm heartened to see that it looks like your first meeting would be looking at the 10 alternatives from the May 29. So I would encourage you to keep that. I'm really concerned that you should not go down a process path of choosing an alternative and then telling the community, this is what we've chosen. Accept it or be damned. So I think the community really needs to be heard, and they need to be informed with, all the options, what the costs are, what the benefits are, what the impacts are. So I do encourage you to do that. You may want to do, more broader polling as well of the community beyond the people that can come to these meetings. I actually know of myself, I won't even be able to attend that meeting, but the people in the room or the people in the council, these are the people that kind of come out to these random community meetings, but most members of the community don't. And frankly, outside of this chamber, anyone I've talked to, whether it's on the train or on the street, generally does not know that this whole process is going on. So I think a lot of members of the city have no idea that you guys are considering this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Stephen Rosenblum, to be followed by Rob Levitsky and Nadia Nayak. And just a reminder, after the committee's had some discussion, there will be another opportunity for quick comments from the public. But if you have any cards that you want to get in for right now, please do so right away. Thanks.
So, good morning, council members and staff. I was at the bicycle meeting last night, and I'd like to thank you all for your great service to the city. Having finished, I left at 10:30. I don't know what time you left. And then arriving here at 8, I think it demonstrates your commitment to doing your job for the city. I'd like to, again, bring up this point that I've made several times already, is that the solution that we come up with has to provide equity for all parts of Palo Alto. We've already seen this morning in the oral comments that we're pitting the people on Churchill against the people on Embarcadero. That's not going to lead to a good solution. And as the bicycle meeting showed, it's easy to get 1,000 signatures on a petition if people are upset. And this, as City Manager Keene pointed out, the separation of the train from pedestrians, bicycles, and cars is a much bigger issue than a bicycle boulevard. And you can imagine the uproar that would occur if we made a bad decision. The bulldozers were here, and people were in an uproar. You say, okay, we spent $2 million on bicycles. Well, that we can get rid of that. If we spend $500 million or $1 billion on this grade separation solution, and then people are upset, recalls, ballot measures. We don't want that. So I think what we're talking about here is the public outreach is the key to coming up with a good process. And I also want to determine or ask if the community advisory panel is going to have members from the TAP on it. I think without that involvement, the citizen input is not going to be effective because questions will be asked and will not be answered, and people will go away uncertain as to what should be done. Thank you.
Thank you. And just while you're there, just for make sure everybody's on the same page, the TAP, do you want to explain what
TAC, you mean, maybe the Technical Advisory Committee, is that it?
Yeah, the Technical Advisory Committee. Thank you. All right. Rob Levitsky and then Nadia Nigan. And it looks like, oh, there you are. Sorry, I didn't see you, Rob.
So, members of the Rail Committee, I spent yesterday morning and afternoon with one of these clickers counting cars at Churchill and at Embarcadero, just so we'd have some data on the number of cars going through. And in the afternoon on Churchill, it's about 1,000 cars from 4 to 6 p.m. And that's going eastbound. And on Embarcadero, it's 2,400 cars. So just as a rough, 2,400 cars going eastbound underneath at Embarcadero, and about 1,000 from 4 to 6 p.m. at Churchill. So those 1,000 cars are going to have to go somewhere if you close that. One of the things I looked at is Menlo Park has decided probably to do Ravenswood as a underground or do something, but leave the other two alone. And so what will happen there is you'll get some degradation of service, but it might not be that bad, and that seems to be what Menlo Park is going to do to a couple of their crossings. And so we could do that at Churchill. And probably if you'd want to do that, leave that open and get some cars across, you'd want to get at least the bikes to go underneath as underground. Also, I'll give you the data here, but one of the things that's clear is that the eastbound underneath Embarcadero is the one-lane path, and it's 2 lanes going westbound. But it has no trouble getting 2,400 cars in the 2-hour block that I looked at, because most of the time, or about half the time, there's no cars, because they're hung up at one of those 3 signals at Pali, at Town and Country, and in El Camino. And so I think probably the best thing to do there is to try to get an overcrossing or undercrossing at Pali, so get rid of one of those signals, and perhaps maybe do some better timing, because a lot of times, most of the time, there's just no cars, and then there's a block of 25 to 35 cars when the signal turns green at Pali, and they come swooping underneath the underpass, and then it's dead for 30, 40 seconds. So let me give you a copy of my traffic counts, and I'll be posting some more of this.
All right. Thank you, Rob.
Oh, you can take them off. Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Rob. And Nadia Naik, and then we'll come back to the committee.
Also, if any of you want to do some traffic count clicks with me for half an hour, it's educational. I'll be happy to sign up with you.
Thank you. Nadia?
Hi. So I would normally have presented you with many pages probably of public comment, but since there clearly wasn't time for staff to actually put together a packet, it's sort of hard to react to the presentation. If I understood everything correctly, we're trying to get some ideas from the Rail Committee today and then make some final decisions by the full council on the 19th, such that a team could be assembled to start working in July. Since today is already Wednesday, we have a packet in less than 6 days, which means the public didn't have a chance to be informed for this meeting and isn't really getting a chance. They'll get their full packet, I'm assuming, tomorrow to be able to review for the special city council meeting. just as a reminder, this new process, which I'm super excited that Eileen Goodwin is joining us on, is sort of a reboot in a way because things didn't go well before, and now we're really rushing quickly to get something done before summer break. And I would say it's not that it's not possible to work through summer, but if you want to have impact from the community and input from the community on whether this is going to go well moving forward, you're not really providing an opportunity for anybody to comment on that packet. I mean, so I would also, the only other specific comment I have is that you have that whoever this panel would be would meet in the afternoons from 3 to 5:30. As a parent of kids, that's an awful time. I mean, pick any other time. So I would just say that. But I mean, I think the bottom line is we're starting again. We're looking for a new communications team. I'm really excited. I feel like we're trying to go fast again, and I'm not trying to slow everybody down, but if you gave 30 more days so that people could review stuff, this will feel a lot better, because you're really saying, God, we really want you included. Great, you have 6 days, look at the packet, and we're gonna go starting in July, and it's unclear how this really goes. I'm also concerned, I see a lot of meetings, I don't see a lot of together meetings. So to Steve's point, it's very hard to have a citizen group who doesn't have interactions with the TAC to understand what some of those technical issues are. And I know that, you could get those TAC people in a room, because I've sat with them in a room, and they can very quickly tell you, well, this doesn't work because this. It takes the public some time to absorb some of those engineering things that engineers can rattle off in seconds. It's going to take some extra documents, even just to get community meetings going. So, I understand that we're trying to go faster. I want us to walk and chew gum. But in order to get a better public process, we have got to take a moment and kind of gather ourselves and review what has gone on and kind of bring everybody together. So I'll just leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you. First, I just really want to ask if any of the staff or consultants want to offer any additional thoughts or response to things we've just heard from the public, or should we go immediately to committee? But I wanted to give you that chance.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, if it's all right. I really hear the comment about the TAC being part of the stakeholder group, and Chair Walbach and I have worked on a project where there were both types of groups, and I do think that there's absolutely an opportunity to bring in. Of course, we always assumed that Etty and her technical team would help staff this stakeholder panel, but I think it could be made more explicit in the document before it gets, finalized. And bringing in other technical advisors, such as Caltrain staff or any other staff that might be appropriate, depending on what the community questions are, I think is absolutely something we'd want to be responsive to.
Thank you. I normally don't do this, but I'm going to use the chair's prerogative just to throw out a couple of questions and thoughts. I'll be very brief, though, and then I want to go to my colleagues. One thing that I am not entirely clear on looking at this, and again, we're all looking at this in real time because there wasn't a chance for it to come in advance. And as a caveat, let me say, I actually had encouraged staff to put this on the agenda, to bring us something, even if we didn't have a chance to look at it in advance, because I thought it was important for this committee to have this discussion prior to going to council next week, even if it was just as a check-in. So we actually got more today than I was anticipating, and I'm glad that this is here. But looking at this for the first time, looking at the community advisory panel, the CAP, and also the stakeholder meetings, and I'm trying to get a sense of where the overlap is between those, and how you see those interacting or supplementing each other. And I was hoping you might kind of compare and contrast what you see with the community advisory panel versus the stakeholder meetings specifically. Not to be confused with the broader community meetings or the technical advisory committee.
Well, without knowing who is going to get onto the panel, it's hard to know where there would be overlap or could be overlap. And I think we were looking at the stakeholder meetings as a way to capture maybe property owners, or as I mentioned, maybe residential real estate agents, or people who wouldn't necessarily come at a Wednesday night type meeting, but who also convene themselves and actually could help get good information out into the world, either through, for example, with real estate people, they farm by having their own letters and whatever, and also we don't want to feed rumors. And so we were trying to think about groups that might not attend public meetings, that would be organized, that can be concerned, and actually might need good access to good information so bad rumors didn't start. So business community, because as I mentioned, sometimes their hours don't overlap. That said, if there was some sort of chamber rep on this panel, maybe that person then should go back to their own community, and we could use that stakeholder meeting for something else. When we did the proposal, there was this idea of 6 big community meetings, and given the amount of time it takes to prep for a community meeting and the deadline of the end of the year, it felt very difficult to have a meeting a month. And so that's where we went for the 3 big community meetings, and we used this capacity to grab the attention of other people who may not attend. And then there was this idea that maybe there should also be some sort of stakeholder group, which got added, although we don't have a roster. But the thinking is that they would be representative of homeowners associations, perhaps the business community, perhaps the real estate community. So it's hard to know where there might be overlap. And obviously we wouldn't want to overlap. We'd want to reach as many new people as possible. So I think we'd have to be a little nimble on that. But the other idea is, just to really close this out, is the stakeholder advisory committee would be the same people for these meetings, and they would build up this knowledge and be representing groups, versus the stakeholder meeting would be just a whole bunch of people representing that organization.
I think you might have just misspoke. I just want to be clear. The community advisory panel would be the one.
Thank
the community
you.
advisory,
The CAP.
again, right? The CAP, the community advisory panel, would be the ones who regularly meet 6 times as this initial suggestion, and would build up some expertise, and would liaison with staff, consultants, and the TAC, potentially, the technical group, so they could come up to speed and get some expertise.
Whereas the stakeholder meeting might be just a real estate breakfast where 100 people show up for that one time.
As an example.
As an example,
Okay.
or Stanford, or I don't know who all might be appropriate, but it would be new people mostly coming one time in lieu of a community meeting.
Okay, and I'll just say that a couple of things I'm thinking about looking at this, just comments for now and concerns. The time of day, actually, I was thinking the same thing before Nadia mentioned it, for a couple of reasons. People who work, 3 o'clock or 3:30 is not necessarily the best time of day. For parents, that's tough. And also, the science around circadian rhythms, that's the time of day where people are often most tired, cranky, frankly. It's not the best time for intellectual firepower from people. So I would suggest at least considering morning meetings as a potential alternative. For either morning
so think like a 9 to 11?
Either morning or evening.
9 to 10:30?
I'm open-minded. I don't want to direct that. I'm just saying I don't want to commit at this point to the time of day for those reasons. And also the timeline between now and us going on our break and this group starting to meet, I'm open-minded about this. I would love for us to say this group could start, this community advisory panel could start meeting over the summer. I think that that's ambitious, just like I think that our goal of finishing this at the end of this calendar year is ambitious. I don't want to see substantial delays, but if it takes a couple extra weeks to get this right, that might be worth it. If it takes an extra year or 2 to get this right, then I'm less enthusiastic. But I'm open-minded and curious to hear from staff consultants and my colleagues about how we can make sure that this community advisory panel is done in the right way, that they can be set up for success, and that our consulting team can be set up for success. I don't, I think we have a habit in Palo Alto of saying, we've got somebody who's going to solve our problems, and then putting too much, on your plate with too short a timeline and too high expectations without being reasonable. And I want us to be sensitive to that, just like we are trying to be with staff. So, city manager, and then I'll go to.
I don't know if my circadian rhythms are I'm in a good place or a bad place this morning on this. I think we have to, and this is what we're trying to do, we have to sort of change our usual MO and walk the talk, which means we need to be collaborative and open and really listen. We were talking about that last night as we go through this process. And and criticism's an important part of that, but criticism is temporary, and we've got to get past those things pretty quickly to, again, get into offering solutions. So I actually think that the fact that we don't have a lot of info, we have a lot of information, and lots of people who are speaking have more knowledge and information than we have in our staff report. And we need to be actually advancing our thoughts and proposals towards solutions as opposed to criticizing what's not happening. Now the criticism is okay, but we've got to get in some mode here, because this is my belief. This is what we're dealing with on this is probably the most challenging issue this city is going to face. There is not some nirvana-based win-win that works like for everybody. It's really difficult. And even an ultimate no option isn't going to work, right? Even when we were talking about yesterday at the bike plan, in one sense, there could have been some perspectives would be, well, let's have a no option thing. Let's just not do a lot of this stuff. And that's not on the table here. And so here's I'm sorry, I want to advance here. We criticize process when we don't like the content a lot of the time. We focus on technical issues. We overly focus on technical issues when it's too hard to confront the adaptive, values-based conflict, as if there is a technical solution to this. And there are technical factors. But this is essentially a leadership issue for the community. And I mean this in the sense of what Ron Heifetz and Marty Linsky would say at Harvard, that there are technical problems and there are adaptive problems. And technical problems is sort of a field of expertise with know-how and things we're used to. Adaptive problems require an evolution of values between people who have disagreements and learning by the people who have the challenge. And it's perfectly represented in just this, hey, let's close Churchill, do something in Embarcadero. Oh, what about my neighborhood? This is an issue. These are adaptive issues that have technical basis. And so I really think we have to understand that. And the last part of this is these guys would say, and I think it's really true, is this decision-making process is about disappointing people in our community, in a sense, at a pace they can absorb. To say, gosh, it's not going to be quite what I would like to have, but I understand that this is actually the best solution, unless we really think the just absolutely dream, easy, expensive solution that's going to involve other people outside of our jurisdiction thinking precisely like we want them to think is the way we're going to go. So I really think that any process we're going to set up right now, I don't care what it is not going to be the right process 3 months from now or 6 months from now or as we move ahead. And we're going to have to make adaptations along the way. That's absolutely critical. We won't get a perfect community advisory panel. It won't matter. People outside will say, who is that community advisory panel? I don't care what they think. That's fine. That's 12 people or whatever. I didn't realize this was going to be. So I just think we need to acknowledge this can be a very challenging, messy process. We all really need to trust each other in our attentions. I mean the council, the staff, our consultants, the community, and understand that this is not going to be necessarily a nice straight path. We can't design everything in advance. We can do our best, but I think we need to be thinking that in one sense we do kind of make the path by walking on it at this point in time. And there's nothing wrong with pointing towards December, and if December ends up not being the case because it's January or it's March, it is. But we don't have to say right now we can't make December. Let's readjust it to March. Anyway.
I think the city manager makes some very good points. And so again, what I'm looking to my colleagues is, how do you feel about this proposal, this discussion on this item? I just want to note we need to wrap this one up by 10. but we do have several other items. And I think the question is really, how can we make sure that this is, that we support this and that this supports the best community engagement we can do in a reasonable, realistic fashion, right? It's not going to be perfect. The process isn't going to be perfect. But what the city manager talked about, in pointing out that we have some different competing groups and having a chance for those groups to meet and work together to hash through some of these difficult issues with some supporting technical expertise, I think will be useful for the community. It'll be useful for the staff, consultants, and for the council to have that group doing its work. While they're doing their work, we on the committee and the council are doing our work as well in parallel to try and hash through these difficult choices. So I'll go to my colleagues with that kind of framing. Lydia?
So I appreciate, so first I'm very happy to meet you, Eileen. I'm very, very excited that we have this community engagement team over here. As Jim had said, listening is very important, and we do have to listen to a community. At the end of the day, I want all of you to realize this is where we live.
Greg?
Yes, thank you for putting together this plan. I actually think it's a really good plan. I do think we do suffer a little bit from having trouble making hard choices, and everyone wants to revisit that choice at the end of the process because they weren't involved, because they weren't paying attention. And I frankly, 12 community members, someone else said, someone's going to say, who are those 12 community members? And I think as long as we're clear, this is not like the comp plan committee. This is an advisory committee to staff to get people involved. This committee has no ability to slow things down, no ability to say we want more process, no ability to say, we should start the process over. I think that's really important to establish those ground rules up front. And this notion that the tax should be with the community seems ridiculous to me. It seems to me that what should happen is that community panel, if they need expertise on questions that staff can't answer, then it's important to bring in someone who has that expertise. But there's no reason to have a TAC committee joint meeting with them. That seems counterproductive and counterintuitive, frankly. I do think this committee needs to start then in July as quickly as possible. I think that we need to hold to the schedule in this community. I actually think the process is going really well. We're actually now down to 10 from, what do we have, 34? And I actually think we could get that number down a lot easier and a lot quicker. I think we're too hesitant. I think staff just needs to bring it to us and say, on a technical basis, if you look at these two options, the hybrid down or the hybrid up, the hybrid down's going to take 10 homes and the hybrid up's going to take 5 homes. Well, we're going to knock out. Put that to the council. They're going to knock out that. I think you can, and I think the smaller number of things you have to ask people questions about, if you go to the stakeholder meetings and the community advisory panel and say, here are the 6 choices we're looking at, frankly, you get much more engagement on the details. And what we heard from the community earlier when we did these panels and these stakeholder meetings was that they were too, not enough focus, too much dream about what you want, that kind of stuff. So I do think that we're going to have the tunnel for a while because we don't have the political will just to say the tunnel makes no sense at $3 billion. I mean, I really think the council should say the tunnel should die tomorrow and we shouldn't even talk about it. But I don't think my colleagues have the political will to do that. So, I think we're going to have the tunnel. I think that we should look at Churchill, and I'm ready to say we're not going to do the hybrid up and we're not going to do the hybrid down, and it's a waste of staff resources and a waste of time. So I would encourage staff at our council meeting to come and tell us, okay, are you willing to take these number of homes to look at those 2 options? I don't think my colleagues are willing to do that. So Okay, well, I'm just trying to get us to where we're going to go. So yes, I want to see us do the stakeholder meetings. I think your community engagement plan is great, but I really do think we need to resist with everything this notion of taking a breath, slowing down, that kind of stuff. You know, I think we've had a lot of time to do this kind of stuff, and the time is now to engage in the actual different scenarios that we could use for each of these grade crossings. So that's what I think it is. I think it's really focusing in and getting people involved in the details and understanding what it is.
Adrian?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Eileen. Eddie? Nice to meet you both. And thank you, everyone, for speaking up. A couple small comments and then one big kind of Jim-like philosophical thing. So I do agree with Councilmember Scharf. I think the TAC and the stakeholder group are independent. And while I'm certainly happy for those folks to meet and chat, I think those meetings should be pulled apart in some regard. Also agree that July is ambitious, but we should do it as much as we can to get that going and get this process started. And as Jim mentioned, stick to our schedule. Right now, we've committed to December. We shouldn't be looking for ways to slip away from that. And I actually think it's important. There have been a number of community members who have spoken up that although the city's goals are ambitious, they understand the need to make a decision. And while the Caltrain funding situation, as we'll discuss later, may have changed a bit, we do also have electrification happening along the corridor and changes coming. I don't know if anybody's noticed Caltrain's newest marketing slogan, I think, is "The future is coming." It's pretty accurate in my opinion. A couple other comments on the 3 community meetings. We've had a couple of these before. I'm happy to have some more. One thing I've noticed, though, is at them, it seems like we're trying to let people know that everything's on the table and that we're just discussing the rail issues and all the alternatives we have and all the impacts and the bikes and the safety and the noise and et cetera. It may be helpful to focus these 3 community meetings a bit more around specific issues. Maybe there is one about bicycle and pedestrian issues. Maybe another one is about the finances. Maybe a third one is about the environmental and engineering concerns. It's just an idea, but as we've hosted these large format meetings, I think we lose something in terms of saying it's about rail. And then kind of the last big thing I wanted to hit on. Jim, I think you're completely right. This is an adaptive problem, and we have been adapting. Eileen, you mentioned the phrase reboot, and as I'm sitting up here, I'm looking, we have one member, a former mayor in the audience, and we have a bunch of mayors up there on the wall. And many of the ones that I've spoken to, often talked about, oh, we did the rail process in 2008 and 2011 and 2012, and then we rebooted the rail committee in 2015 and 2017 again. So we've done a lot of reboots here, and I agree with Councilmember Scharf, that's one of our issues. So the challenge for us is as we have this process, and as we're getting closer to some of the more important decisions, how do we allow people to enter perpendicularly? And that's really, really important, where we don't want people coming in and saying, I'm just learning about this, gosh, start a new stakeholder group so I can be involved. And I think that's something that we haven't done enough of a job communicating to our residents, actually, in some regards, and also to groups like Stanford and some of the private entities you listed here. So if there are ways where we can have those people enter and acknowledge that the city has been doing this for a number of years, we have a lot invested, I think that's helpful. And to some degree, that is actually letting people know what's off the table. So there's certain discussions and decisions that we have made, whether it's at council or community level or in the city manager's office, about the parameters of this project. And I think it's important for us to let folks know which of those are off the table at this point and for what reasons. Just looking at the schedule here, it's certainly ambitious, but I think we have to be. I agree with Councilmember Scharf. I think our process is good and getting better, particularly around the technical and functional work we're doing. The community engagement piece, nobody's ever going to get it right, especially not in Palo Alto. So we do what we can, we adapt it. But I do think a really promising thing is that we are seeing, regularly engaged community leaders who are beginning to support the process as well. And I think that's really important. And where we can find and lift up those voices is good for us. So thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, Could I just invoke city manager privilege for just a second? I really want to thank Councilmember Koo for her short but sort of heart of the matter challenge we have, right? Which when you said, Lydia, this is where we live, right? And we have citizen leaders here who in our community who woke up to this issue a long time ago and have been working on it. And we have neighborhood groups like NOPA. We have the Embarcadero folks who, wake up to the fact, my goodness, this is where we live, and there are some real challenges. But as, again, one of the speakers said, most of the community, this is still background issues and things, and this is what's going to happen, right? We're going to be, to what extent do we have an ever-growing kind of awareness from people about this is where we live, and my goodness, within that, we have to make some choices, of which, more often than not, what our default position is to make no choice. I mean, continue to study stuff forever or just kind of not make a choice. You're going to do that. And I think we're on the path to that. And I do think that it will help, even when there's conflict, that we realize that everybody's in this together. This is where we live. And the council's goal is your job really is to be able to be within that situation, actually make the best possible recommendation that honors the fact that, everybody lives here, and, you're going to strike the best bargain on behalf of the city as to what you can do. Thanks.
So, a couple thoughts. I think that there's there's polar ends of process speed. One is, get everything done right now. Another is paralysis by analysis, delay everything. I think I think the debate that we're hearing here, the discussion is really marginal discussion in the middle. Do we want to take a couple extra weeks? Do we want to get this, process, how much of the process do we want to get launched before we go on break? That's really the central question for me, that we should make a recommendation to the council on, and the council should decide next week, right? How much of the process should be launched and already moving by the time we get back? I think that's the central question. I am perfectly comfortable at this point in having staff and the consultants, if you can bring us, maybe a bit more fleshed out, details about what you're thinking here by next Monday, and for council to say, that looks like a great plan, go execute. If staff and the consultants feel like they need to spend more time working in the community, working with stakeholders to identify, I don't want to start with the individuals, I want to start with, the groups, right? Representation, right? Figuring out what are the right 12-ish, 12, 15 groups that should be represented. If you need more time to do that, then I think you should take that time. If you feel that by next Monday, here are the groups, or that you feel like you will be able to figure that out, and we'll be able to start doing recruitment to recruit the individuals to go to those groups and say, we want your group to be part of this community advisory panel. Can you as a group nominate a person or two to be your liaisons to this community advisory panel? I could see that going forward during our summer recess. So I'm thinking, you spend a little more time in the community. Our consultants get to know our community better, go out with Rob and others, from the city manager's office or whoever, and don't want to nominate Rob unless he wants to. Go out in the community, get to know the community better, and figure out what are the right groups, what are the right agencies to include, whether it's Stanford or Stanford Research Park, Palo Alto Unified. I know a lot of them have some representation on the TAC, but that's where you might want some overlap. Whether we want the chamber to have, or the business community in some sense to have a representative on this community advisory panel, which I actually think would be advisable. And then start figuring out, okay, what's the process for picking the right person or people from each of those groups, those bodies? I think that you can definitely be doing that over the summer. And if you feel like they're ready to meet, I'm okay letting you go and do that. Because what I don't want is for council to micromanage this process, but I also don't want us to force the process before the staff and consultant are ready to do it right. So basically, I want to give, I want to give us an opportunity to trust the consultants and the staff to get this right, and look, if we move forward and we give them the authorization to go forward with this, and we come back from our break and we feel like they messed up, we know us, we'll say that, right? But as we move forward to next Monday, and from Monday going into the summer break, I actually do think this is a good plan. So when I'm, counseling a little bit of, openness to slowing down, what I mean is that I want us to empower our consultants and our staff to take, even if it's just an extra week or two, the time to think this through. I don't want to see us delay 6 months. I don't want us to see us delay 6 years. So that's where I'm at.
So I think you clarified we'll do what we can as it relates to this item for next week, and we'll see where we are on that. And it's 20 after 9. I was talking a lot myself. I apologize for that.
I think we need to make a motion to recommend this to council. No, I mean,
Okay.
isn't that?
This is a check-in.
Yeah, okay.
I think that would be helpful.
Yep. Do you want to make a motion?
Yes, I'll move that we move forward with staff's plan and the community engagement process.
It's on. It's on. You use it.
All right, I guess I was not close enough. I said I'll move that we move forward with staff's plan for community engagement, including the community advisory panel and the stakeholder meetings and the rest of it.
So we have a motion by Scharf and a second by Fine. Do you want to speak to your motion?
No.
Do you want to speak to your second? Okay, and I'll speak to it and say I will be supporting this, and you've heard our comments, and you've heard the comments of the community. I would actually venture that several of the groups who will ultimately be ideal candidates to be some of the participants on that community advisory panel are represented in this room today. So I think you've got a starting point of some of the people you're going to want to consider including.
I don't know, Corey. I'm not sure I agree with you.
You might or might not. And that's why I'm not micromanaging, and
You
I'm not.
seem to be micromanaging, frankly. Of all the council members up here, you're micromanaging the most at the moment.
I appreciate
what to do.
I appreciate the feedback, Greg.
Thank you, Corey.
I'll continue with my comments now. But we're not giving specific direction on which people you should pick. Okay. Saying, you know how to, the staff knows how to reach out to this community and take the time to do it right without causing undue delay. I know that sounds a little, wishy-washy, but we're trusting you to do this over the next few weeks.
Corey.
Okay.
Greg?
Yes, Corey.
Turn your mic off.
Okay.
All right. Greg or Adrian?
Just one quick comment. We've happy to support this. Thank you all for bringing it. We have mentioned the issue of delay and how right now we're targeting December, but somebody to bring up if we need 30 days or if we need 6 months. I'm not against that. I think we should aim for December, but if we do need a delay or staff or consultants feel that, just kind of characterize the cost for us, what it may be putting at risk, how much more it's costing the taxpayers, and what it means for our process. That would just be the one request.
Can I ask what was the motion?
Yeah, the motion was to recommend the staff recommendation to the full council for consideration or adoption next Monday. And before we take a vote on this, if there's anyone else to speak to this, we do have one card from Cedric, if you want to speak to this item, if you have anything additional that you need to say.
Yeah, sorry, I forgot to say something in my last comment, which is actually, I would urge a consultant to really think hard about what is the process for really doing deep community engagement. What I've noticed in a lot of these community meetings is they tend to be kind of divisive, and they don't really elicit some sort of consensus groupthink. What happens is there's a presentation by staff that goes over time, and then the community breaks up into small tables, and at those tables, the most vocal people, the most aggressive people say a lot, and the shy people don't say anything. So you're really just hearing the loudest voices. So I don't know what the solution is because it's a big city. But, you know, if we were a smaller community, we would have an authentic council process of everybody speaks and you go around and around and around until everybody's heard. So I don't really know how you do that, you know, trying to engage, you know, 100 people, 200 people, 1,000 people, but really do try to find what is the best way to really make it so that even the shyest person feels heard. Thank you.
Thank you. We now have Dean 11, Monica, and Nadia.
And we'll be repeating this very thing next week, 1 week from now.
Yep.
Dean 11, Friends of Caltrain, and I wanted to make a suggestion for the content of the community discussion that echoes some of the comments that were made by council members, which is that there should be a session that is really focused on how to pay for options at various different scales. This is not like decisions about a bike boulevard and a bike plan, where there might be an option that costs $100,000, $500,000, $2 million. Like, all of those are easily within the realm of the city to pay for. So it's possible to, you know, spend all your time on the options and then at the end of the day figure out how to pay for it. But in terms of the options that might be on the table, like, everything is going to be a stretch in terms of a local match. And some things are significantly more of a stretch. And so really having an interactive process, considering the various different means and mechanisms and changes in the community that would entail paying for some of the options, I think is really, really essential. And that, you know, that can't be put off until later. I think it needs to be brought in, and people really need to reflect and grapple with what it would take to pay for various different choices that people may wish to have happen. Thank you.
Thank you, and we will not be taking any more cards on this item. I forgot to mention earlier, it's 2 minutes on this round. So Monica, Nadia, and Roberto, and that is it for this item for public.
Hello, my name is Monica Tambran. You've seen me speak at many city council meetings, and I've come to a bunch of the meetings around the rail. I live on the 100 block of Churchill, and I am a member of the North Old Palo Alto Community Group. The hybrid solution and the reverse hybrid solution will take my home through eminent domain. So this is the face you need to remember. A home my husband and I spent 5 years remodeling, a home where I am raising 2 little boys, ages 4 and 6. This is our dream home, plain and simple. Churchill mirrors the situation at Castro. Castro is only a few blocks from Shoreline, and Mountain View has decided to close Castro Street and improve Shoreline. Churchill is a 7-block road that is a shortcut that people use. It's not a main artery. I love the saying analysis paralysis, and I agree with Councilmember Scharf that we need to make some decisions. I live every day with existential threat that gives me existential stress. There are people here who talk about slowing down. They have no skin in this game. I have a lot of skin in this game. I have my home to lose. I also continue to talk about the fact that we shouldn't make any decisions we can't reverse. Taking homes and creating an underpass or a hybrid is not something that can be taken back. It cannot be reverted. But closing Churchill today does not mean that down the road you couldn't reopen it when the city is able to fund a tunnel or whatever other option that allows Churchill to be reopened. Thank you, and thank you. Thank you, and as you think about these solutions, please remember me and my family, because at the end of the day, you're impacting real lives and real families, like Councilwoman Koo mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you, and just as a reminder, for general etiquette for the council and committees, we do discourage clapping, booing, and other expressions of vocal support, but encourage people to feel free to wave if you support somebody, just as a general matter of etiquette. It's called the Liz wiggle. Yeah, we want to make sure everybody feels comfortable, regardless of their views. So Nadia and then Roberto.
So I'm super sympathetic to folks like Monica. I think it is precisely because I think even the narrow range of alternatives that we've come up with now, I'm not sure everybody even understands what the implications are. We haven't really fleshed those out well enough for people to even know what we're talking about. And it's because of that that I think that we're still missing better communication on these things for people to even understand where we are. I mean, there's a lot of confusion on this stuff. I would recommend for the staff report that needs to come out for the council packet, to what Councilmember Fine was saying, it's not the number of meetings, it's the point of the meetings. So if it's, okay, we have the following decision point that needs to be X, Y, or Z, then that the meetings be laid out as, we're having this many meetings because this is the topic of each meeting. To the extent that we need to be thinking about, this isn't just what gets us to the end of the year and gets us to these things. Whoever is participating in this is really the emissaries for this project going forward, and frankly, for what will likely have to be some kind of fundraising thing. That means not just getting the businesses to talk loud and getting residents to talk loud. It means being able to pass a general vote of more than 70% of all Palo Altans. You have to convince Barron Park, and you've got to convince Crescent Park that what's happening at any of these intersections makes sense. So equity matters. So I will just say, this isn't about slowing down because we've got to do more analysis paralysis. It's that I want to be sure we're including everybody in this conversation, and frankly, that everybody that is even making these decisions fully understands the things that remain on the table and will take eminent domain. Thank you.
Thank you. Roberto is our last speaker on this item, and then we are going to move to a vote.
I don't, well, okay, so, hi, Roberto. I live on the 100 block of Embarcadero. I feel your pain. I really hope we come up with solutions that don't cause strife. And the thing that worries me, which is related to community engagement here, is I have no understanding whatsoever of the scope of the problems for traffic. I do not know what is the actual bottleneck, how many cars go in what direction at what time. I cannot then help with alternatives. And look, you got a bunch of good engineers here. And my closest analog for this is when I did HGV2, and now we're reinventing DCP and all this stuff. And we're not dumb, we can help, but we actually have to have some data in order to do that. The community is, I tell you, we really are incented to help here. If you give us some data, it's not analysis paralysis. It will make things go more smoothly. Thank you.
We're getting some comments actually that are most relevant to the next item, just so we're clear when we're looking about revisiting the alternatives, Mr. Chair.
Yes. Which we will do in item 2. So let's move to a vote. All in favor of the motion? Aye. Passes unanimously with Councilmember Koo not participating. All right, let's take a 3-minute break. That means 5, but say 3 and people will be back at 5. Give people a chance to breathe and stretch their legs. Bring us back to order. Thank you all for indulging us for a break. I think we all needed it. If we could move on to our next item. Item number 2 on our agenda, of course, is, if I could have the city manager's attention, as well as staff and consultants. We're moving on to item 2, which is discussion and potential recommendations to further narrow possible grade separation alternatives. I'll turn to staff first. And also, just wanted, I think before we finish this item, I think Eileen Goodwin will probably have to depart for her next meeting, and I just want to thank her for her participation, and again, welcome her to the team. So moving on to item 2. Staff?
Yes, thank you, Chair, members of the committee. I'm Joshua Mello, the Chief Transportation Official. Based on some of the comments from the Rail Committee, Council, and the community on the 10 ideas that were advanced on the May 29th City Council meeting. Since that meeting, we have directed AECom, our consultant, to do some additional due diligence on 3 of the particular ideas. And Eddie is going to present some of the results from that initial preliminary analysis. And the ideas that we had them look at are the hybrid for Palo Alto Avenue, the hybrid at Churchill Avenue, and the reverse hybrid at Churchill Avenue. I do want to note that the results that Eddie's going to present today are not representative of the kind of thorough analysis that we will need to complete on the alternatives that we select for full analysis over the coming months. This is just a very preliminary look at some of the potential impacts if we were to lay out some of these ideas at Palo Alto and Churchill Avenue. So with that, I will turn it over to Eddie, the project manager for AECom.
All right, thank you. So as Josh mentioned, these are the 3 alternatives, and this is the matrix that was at the council, and what's highlighted in yellow are the 3 alternative ideas that I'll be just talking to. To summarize, Churchill, the hybrid, which is where the road is lowered and the rail is elevated. There's Churchill reverse hybrid, which is the flip of that, where the road is elevated over a lowered track. And then Palo Alto is the hybrid, where the road is lowered below the elevated track. So I'm going to just kind of go through those in that order. And again, as Josh mentioned, this is kind of a high-level engineering evaluation at this point in time.
Why these 3?
Say that again?
Why these 3 of the rest?
So these 3 ideas are, first of all, we've heard some comments from the public that these ideas are concerning to them. We wanted to get a better idea of what some of the potential property impacts and other impacts could be pretty quickly for these 3 ideas.
So moving forward, this is an aerial view of Palo Alto. Let me just orient you for that. On the right-hand side, the left-hand side is the Embarcadero Road, which is the underpass that's existing out there. And on the far right-hand side is the other constraint, which is the Caltrain, California Avenue station platform. What the green line represent is the existing rail as it is today. And what I just want to kind of point out is this is kind of run you through the process of how we come up, how we analyze these different ideas, in the fact that we also look at, we look at the criteria that's out there that's published today, which includes the Caltrain criteria that's based on their design speed for their trains, as well as the roadway criteria that's out there that we use that in this case will be Caltrans for roadway design, as well as AASHTO. So starting from the right-hand side, one of our constraints, and I'll just point out some of the major constraints in evaluating this hybrid, is we have the platform of California Avenue Station, and what that is a constraint where we want to make sure that as we bring the railroad profile up or down, that we do not affect the platform, because that becomes a constraint. The other constraint, let me see if the mouse is what I call is a construction limit basis constraint, and the fact that Caltrain is an operating commuter rail, and that we have to make sure that construction of whatever alternative or idea that we come up with does not impact commuter rail services, especially during the weekend. We do know that we can have some opportunities on weekends to do some cutovers and some shutdowns, but it becomes very limited. So we really have to keep that operational construction constraint. And what that does, it means that we have a certain distance from the platform that we can then need to hold in order to be able to swing out a shoe fly in this case. And so that basically starts this red line here represents the limits of the railroad profile that we start to raise up from the platform. So we can start our profile about 1,000 feet north of the platform to start the construction. We look at a 1% grade, which is the maximum grade that Caltrain has in their published criteria. And by the time we get to Churchill, which is towards the left-hand side of the thing, we are at about the railroad embankment is about 10 feet high at that point. That's the maximum we can attain based on the criteria of speed as well as grade based on the railroad criteria. Which that means is that if the railroad is at 10 feet high, the Caltrain criteria allows for us to have a 15.5 vertical clearance from the top of roadway to a bottom of the railroad structure, which equates to about a 22 feet we need from the top of rail to the top of the roadway structure, which means that the excavation at Churchill would be about 15 feet down, or 12 to 15 feet down, to attain that vertical clearance for a roadway underneath an elevated railroad. And then once we pass Churchill, the railroad then touches back down at about a 6% grade, and we can get the railroad down before any impacts to the Embarcadero existing undercrossing. What this means in geometry, in impacts, this is an exhibit showing the roadway limits of construction. On Churchill, Churchill is running up and down on this photograph. Let's see if I can get this mouse to work. Oh, where's the mouse? Oh, well. The purple represents the limits of construction of roadway on Churchill, Alma, and Mariposa. For the sake of the engineering design, we assumed that the design speeds were at 25 miles per hour. The roadway profile for Churchill is going down at a 7% grade. On the lower part of, is the mouse there? Oh, there it is, okay, sorry. Where's the mouse? There it is, okay. This is the, basically, I'll use the word conform, but basically at this point on Churchill, that's where we start the road to lowering down so it gets below grade, and its maximum excavation would be at the crossing of the railroad. And then it starts to raise back up. Here we're using about a 7% grade. 5% grade is what we typically would see for ADA handicap. So in this case, for the 7%, we'd have to be looking at maybe doing something of a different profile for a sidewalk. In this case, we assumed a 5% grade on Alma as well as a 5% grade on Mariposa, and that these are basically the limits of construction for the roadway. With this hybrid here, we have a potential to impact 14 to 22 residential properties. It'll have visual impacts. It'll be, just to kind of give you some context, this hybrid is similar to San Carlos in the fact that the roadway is lowered about 12 to 15 feet, and the rail is raised about 10 feet. So just to give you a kind of context, if you're familiar with the San Carlos location for Caltrain.
Are you saying like the Holly Street?
Excuse me, yes, Holly Street.
Thank you.
Moving to the reverse hybrid, again, the analysis is very, very similar in the fact that we have the California Avenue Caltrain station as a constraint, as well as the Embarcadero existing underpass as a constraint. We come off the Embarcadero, I'll just start from there, at a 1% grade down. That means by Churchill, the rail is down about 6 feet. The difference in criteria here is that the required vertical clearance for a rail under a roadway structure is significantly more, on the order of 22.5 feet for Caltrain and 27.5 feet for high-speed rail. So therefore, our construction, the roadway would be elevated about 22 feet above the top of rail, 22 feet of embankment fill above its current location. We still have and then we would be rising back up on the rail at a 0.5% grade. That gets us to conform or to not impact the Caltrain station platform at California Avenue. Similar to the previous exhibit, purple outline here represents the limits of construction. You can see there significantly more on this reverse hybrid because of the fact that the roadway is much higher than we had lowered the roadway in the previous alternative. Here we're looking at an 8% grade on Churchill and 5% grades, but you can see the limits of impact go further on Mariposa, and now we're impacting roadways on Kellogg as well as on the other road to the south. There are, in this particular one, there's a potential from 40 plus residential properties to be impacted in this alternative, as well as on the order of 40 plus. So I'm going to go to the Palo Alto hybrid. We have a lot of the similar constraints, but actually we have more constraints at Palo Alto. This is an aerial view showing Palo Alto with Menlo Park on the left-hand side with the San Francisco, the creek, I'll just say the creek. I always get tongue-tied on that, on the name of that creek. And then the Palo Alto Caltrain station platform on the south side. In this case here, we also have a historic railroad bridge that crosses over the creek. And so in this alternative, what we were looking at is that the shoe fly would actually become the permanent railroad alignment. And that as we shoe fly to the red line represents the graphic of the shoe fly moving it to the east. And again, we have the same limitations of, getting a construction envelope. Need to get the railroad far enough to the east so that we can have continued operations of Caltrain while we do the construction of the permanent alignment to the east. We also have a constraint of there is a heritage tree, the El Palo Alto heritage tree in the El Palo Alto Park. This alternative evaluation shows that the permanent alignment is very, very close to that tree. There are trees along between the buffer between Alma Street as well as the mainline track that would get eliminated, and I forgot to mention that those were also issues on the previous two alternative as well. We'd have to do some surveys in this to understand how close we are to that tree, and as for the alignment itself. And we also have some constraints why we moved this. The initial thought was to move this to the east, as we have constraints on the west side, which includes a reservoir in this sports complex area, as well as when you get into Menlo Park, you have some commercial buildings that would get impacted. In this alternative, it appears that no residential properties are impacted. We do have some impacts along Alma Lane, along Alma, where we could be looking at reduced width. And I forgot to mention that we'd also have reduced widths on those other two hybrids as well on Alma Lane during construction, a temporary one, because those are only for the shoe flies. In this case, it may be a permanent reduction on Alma. So from there, moving back, again, this hybrid here is by the time we come up at a 1% grade from the slope, where we have at the rail at Palo Alto Avenue, we would have a rail embankment fill of approximately 7 feet high, and that means we need to excavate the road down about 15 feet in order to have that 15.5-foot clear plus the structure depth at Palo Alto. What that equates to as far as construction along Palo Alto and Alma Street is depicted here in the purple, where, again, coming off of El Camino Real, this location is where the road is conforming to the existing, and then we would start to do the excavation or lowering of the railroad so that your maximum excavation occurs at the crossing of the railroad. And this one assumes a 7% grade along Palo Alto and a 5% grade along Alma. We would have, again, utility relocations, you'd have some visual impacts. In this particular case, it appears there's no residential impacts, but there are impacts potentially to that commercial property for some driveway reconstruction and that like. But the biggest concern here is we'd still have to make some more evaluation of the impacts to the Palo Alto Park. And with that, I'd open it up to questions. And I just, as Josh mentioned, these are just initial engineering kind of technical look at this in terms of what's published criteria and how that applies to an alternative.
Any other comments from staff right now? You don't have to, but.
Well, I did want to give you kind of my technical take on the results, and I think, given the property impacts that are likely with the two Churchill hybrids, the hybrid and the reverse hybrid, I think I would have some pretty strong reservations about carrying forward those two ideas. There is a concern, though, that by removing those two, we'd be left with only the closure idea and the no-build idea. We would still have two on the table that we could carry forward and perform a more detailed analysis on. For Palo Alto Avenue, given the fact that there's fairly limited or possibly no impacts to residential properties, I think that may warrant a little more additional analysis, maybe not carry it all the way forward to the full-blown alternatives analysis, but I think we could do a little more detailed look at the alignment and how it may impact the park and the tree.
If I might add to that, appreciate that, Josh. And the recommendation related to Palo Alto Avenue, I think, is just sort of responsible staff work and due diligence. I would just remind the committee of something you already know, but the public, which is one of the goals here all along has been to narrow the options so that we could get started on much more detailed analysis of the alternatives. The deep dive analysis we've estimated could cost $200,000 to $300,000 per option. We've just identified, from my city manager perspective, real problems with the hybrid and the reverse hybrid at Churchill, and we've identified a real problem at Palo Alto Avenue also. I would suggest that the committee consider advancing a recommendation to the whole council so that we have a focused conversation next week on actually looking at removing 2 to 3 of those from consideration. If we don't, if we get into the deep dive mode, we're going to spend $500,000 potentially over the next 6 months evaluating these options as part of our process. And I really ask, going back to Dina Levin's comments, I think whatever we're looking at here, we're going to be on a city solution is going to, at a minimum, approach $1 billion. when we think about how we're going to separate these things. And then obviously could be much more. So in this particular case, I think the scale is big enough. I don't think we should be wasting any money unnecessarily, so.
Thank you for that. We do have several speakers on this that will, money we don't have, the city manager points out. Before we go to the public speakers on this item, and again, as before, we will have, so we'll have 2 minutes per speaker at the front end and 2 minutes at the back end. But first, any quick, just clarifying questions from council members, from committee members? Greg?
So what I heard was this: on the Churchill Avenue reverse hybrid, it would take roughly 44 residential properties?
It would impact that many properties. The impacts would vary depending on the parcel.
And then on the Churchill Avenue hybrid, the other one, did I hear 24? Was that the number? I just wanted to make sure I had the numbers right.
So the traditional hybrid was 14 to 22 properties,
Okay, 14
and the reverse hybrid was 40 plus properties.
And on the Palo Alto hybrid, no residential properties are impacted. There's a commercial property, but it's a driveway issue?
Potentially, yes.
So I was unclear what the real issue with the Palo Alto hybrid is. Is it that it's too close to El Palo Alto most likely, or we need to do some more? I was unclear what the takeaway, it seemed to me the takeaway was that we would keep that on the list, but I was trying to get a sense if I missed something.
There's a couple things going on with Palo Alto is that we're very close to the heritage tree. We are taking trees. In all three of these, the shoe fly on the other two is a temporary that could impact trees. But it also extends into Menlo Park. So it goes beyond the city limits for that alternative.
Now, Menlo Park indicated they wanted to work with us. Was that on the viaduct, not on this, or would they still be open to working with us on that?
Well, so in all likelihood, Caltrain may end up advancing these projects after we get them through the planning phase. That's how it's, being done on other grade separations. So as long as we continue to work with Menlo Park, I don't see that as a huge issue, as long as we're not proposing any property takings or any major impacts on the Menlo Park side.
And have we looked at all at the viaduct, whether or not the viaduct is superior to the Palo Alto hybrid?
We could look at a viaduct. I mean, the profile would be similar. When you say viaduct, you mean completely elevated without?
We really have combined two options on this. We have Palo Alto Avenue hybrid and/or viaduct. Okay. So I know we've combined it to one. We probably should separate them because they really probably are separate. And so we probably should really say we have three options on Palo Alto Avenue. And the question is, I'll just say, I don't think we should close Palo Alto Avenue. I think we need to keep it open.
Yeah.
I think a huge number of people use it. So I'm really interested in understanding which is the better, the Palo Alto Avenue hybrid and/or the viaduct option.
So the footprint would be roughly the same because we can't build in the existing alignment because of the operating railroad and the historic nature of the trestle bridge that's out there. So what Eddie did was just look at the horizontal alignment, and that would be relatively similar for both, a berm or a viaduct structure.
And then one other final technical type question. So I agree, and I think we should probably get rid of both the Churchill Avenue reverse hybrid and the Churchill Avenue hybrid, and I see no reason to continue studying those. But it seems to me that there's another option on Churchill that we talk about, but we lump it in, which is the partial closure of Churchill Avenue. And I think it's full closure and partial closure, and those are the two real options that we should look at. And we should spell them out separately, because I think it's getting lost in this conversation. I have this conversation every time, but we don't change it.
And could we just, again, be clear, in both of those cases, when we talk about full or partial closure, we're still including the potential for, bike pedestrian connections?
No, absolutely.
It's not a grade separation. Correct, but it's not a grade separation is the point.
Right.
Okay, any other just questions right now? Let's go. Adrian, quick question. Mike?
I know nobody ever remembers it, but we do have the Stanford station. And I'm wondering if we considered that as well, particularly with the Churchill options. It's mainly a weekend station.
That would need to be, removed or relocated with the hybrid options that were looked at, or we'd have to reconstruct it below grade or above grade.
Okay, so that's the first time we've heard that, and that's actually significant. I don't think many Palo Altans use the Stanford station, but I know when there's a game at Stanford, it's a big deal. It's also right there at Town and Country and Pally, and
so it is feasible that it could be moved north. The alignment that Eddie presented today begins south of Embarcadero. Right now, the station kind of straddles the Embarcadero undercrossing.
Okay, that may deserve a little bit more looking about what we want to do there, but let's not forget about that little station.
Good catch. Thank you. Okay, let's go to the public. You'll have 2 minutes each. Cedric, Martin, Roberto, Barbara, and several others. So those are the first few. 2 minutes each. Cedric?
Hello again. So yeah, I agree with Greg Scharf. I think that the Palo Alto hybrid, the Palo Alto fully raised viaduct should be separated out. In addition, I think you really should seek clarification that I really don't think that the viaduct requires any property takes ongoing. Maybe for construction there might be some impact, I don't know. But I think that's really an option that should be considered. And maybe it's partly my fault. I didn't properly lobby at the May 29 meeting, but I think a viaduct would make sense to continue to have that as an option for Churchill, since it looks like you're saying, oh, we don't want to do any property takes, which I fully understand. So you're saying, oh, maybe we'll close it or partially close it. A viaduct would be an option where you could have a grade separated option without, I believe, taking homes. And then, let's see, finally, I think that, I don't know if you're going to be studying more of these, all the other options of the 10 options at a later date. And certainly by the time you decide to start narrowing down options, we really need to have costs for the viaduct. That has not been costed out. And so the community and you don't know what it costs, and you don't know how to prioritize that. And then finally, actually, you really should explore the possibility whether the viaduct could be constructed without requiring a temporary track. I think you could probably keep the western track open and construct a viaduct in between the western track and Alma, but I don't know for sure. So you should look at that, because if you could avoid the cost and the impact of temporary tracks down Alma, I think that would be significant. Thank you.
Oops. Thank you, Cedric. Martin Bernstein to be followed by Roberto Peon.
Thank you, Chair Walbach and council members. So we're looking for a 120-year solution. The reason I mentioned 120, architect Otto Wagner created the viaduct system in 1898 in Vienna. And so that's one solution to solve the issue of cross-border against urban environment. At the last week's council meeting, Councilmember Koo asked me to present, and that's in your packet, and also members of the staff, the air rights agreement between City of Palo Alto and a private developer. That's for the Abattoir property. So that was an example of value capture of land owned by a public entity. So if there's an agreement between the property owner of the railroad and then City of Palo Alto, and then that gets transferred to developers, there's a chance for value capture. The viaduct, and you've got pictures in the packet of an example of the viaduct, the one in Vienna, and then also another sketch showing that area. Viaduct, there's no safety crossing issue. There's no privacy issue with the viaduct. Again, there's about 4.5 miles of 40-foot trees along Alma Street, so there's no privacy issue there as that get raised. Noise reduction, we have electric engines, and then there would be certainly no eminent domain proceedings. So in terms of the mathematics of any value capture, whatever leasable space is above or below the viaduct, at the viaduct, then it'd be the space below. It's just, if you look at $10 a square foot times how many miles times how many square feet, either 1 or 2 stories below the viaduct, it's just a matter of mathematics for value capture. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Martin. Now go on to Roberto Peon, and we will not be taking any more cards for this. Again, there will be an opportunity to speak afterwards. After Roberto is Barbara Hazlitt.
So a couple small technical things on the proposals I saw. I'm not clear why there would be impact to Mariposa. It seems like you would close the intersection between Mariposa and Churchill and so not have to submerge it. So that might reduce some impact. On the other hand, with the rest of the impact I saw there, it still seems like it's not something we want to do. It looks pretty horrific. I'm still hoping that we get some more exploration. I mean, I agree that we should probably eliminate the 2 options at Churchill that were presented today. They both seem pretty bad. But I think that we should explore some more solutions that don't require eminent domain. I still think it's an interesting exploration to think about 1-lane underpass that could begin farther away from Alma. That would not impact Alma. I mean, the light at Alma already impacts traffic flow at Alma. If we have a one-direction underpass, it will allow us to have about the same amount of traffic because switching rates don't have to be very high because we're not going on Alma. Again, I strongly suggest we think of these kinds of alternatives that don't require taking. Thanks.
Thank you, Roberto. Now go on to Barbara Hazlitt.
Thank you again. Again, Barbara Hazlitt, 38-year resident in the 1100 block of Emerson Street. I'm also going to make an emotional plea and ask you to look at my face. Because again, I've lived in my home for 38 years. It's right at the corner of the north side of Emerson and Kingsley that goes on to Embarcadero. One of the things that you seem to be doing is giving a lot of credence to Churchill, which I totally understand. I don't want them eminent domained, but I'm not clear on what kind of deep dive or any dive you've done about what the impact will be to Professorville and Embarcadero if you close Churchill and then you think, well, we better widen the Embarcadero underpass because we have to find a place for those cars. I don't hear in any of this what you think about the eminent domain is going to be to my neighborhood. And again, being in my home 38 years, where I brought my children home from Stanford Hospital, where I have 38 Christmases, where I want to age in place, it matters to me too. So I want you to take that into consideration, and I want to understand why you would take one consideration off the table when you seemingly have not done the work to understand the eminent domain consequences to Embarcadero and the most historic neighborhood in Palo Alto, which is Professorville. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Nadia Naik, to be followed by Roland LeBrun.
So I recognize that this is just very preliminary and that you're using only the stated percentages. But I will point out there is one other alternative that I thought was sort of encapsulated in the reverse, I don't even know what a reverse hybrid is. I thought it was encapsulated in the thing where the train is going to go below the road. But I would say that if you kept the road exactly as it is or raised it a foot or 2, if you use a 2% grade, you can go down further. And I will point out that in the 2010 alternatives analysis that High Speed Rail did, they actually used 2%. So the fact that High Speed Rail put it in their own EIRs means that it is not just some sort of constraint that has happened with Caltrain. It is technically possible. And so I know we're going back to the 1%, 2% conversation that you all hate, but I will just say, when you're looking at things that might potentially open this up, and you're looking at trying to get rid of things that will take away eminent domain, this would be a possibility that would not take houses, would be able to put the train further down, but it requires some flexibility and some negotiating with Caltrain, and I hope that that's still possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Nadia. Next is Roland LeBrun, to be followed by former Mayor Yoriko Kishimoto.
Thank you. So I know As you know, I'm not resident of Palo Alto, so it's not for me to weigh on solutions one way or the other. My interest is primarily in ensuring that we don't inadvertently do anything that would impact the capacity of the line. But through the chair, could I please ask a lady over here to confirm what I just heard, that Caltrain requires 22.5 feet and the High-Speed Rail Authority requires 27.5 feet clearance? Did I hear this correctly?
Well, so go ahead and ask your questions, and then we'll give staff an opportunity to respond after the public comments.
It depends on what the answer is, because I'll tell you why. This is why I filled in my card. I had the same situation in Gilroy last week, where we were told that the track centers, where I had to be 20 feet apart, is not true, it's 15 feet. And we keep on hearing these numbers from these consultants, and the reason it matters, because 5 feet could actually end up costing us hundreds of millions of dollars, and untold number of properties, being taken to eminent domain. So it's kind of important, and I think at some point we're going to have to do something about these people, probably at the next high-speed rail board meeting. Thank you, but if you could get clarification, I appreciate it.
Thank you. Former Mayor Yoriko Kishimoto, to be followed by Jason Matloff.
Okay, thank you very much. Yoriko Kishimoto, and I was actually the first chair of the rail committee, so I know the tough choices you are facing. So I think it's a positive step to take these hybrids off the table. I don't support the eminent domains there either, but I'm asking you to take something else off the table, which is the widening of Embarcadero Road at the underpass. I was also the first chair. I was the chair of the Comprehensive Plan Transportation Committee back in the 1992. And I think for the last 20 years, we've been working towards basic principles, a basic philosophy in Palo Alto that we've come to support. And so I'm going to be part of this group that's going to be circulating a petition against the widening of Embarcadero Road for 5 big reasons. One is that it would not solve the transportation challenges. There's no evidence that the current underpass is the bottleneck. You've seen some data from Rob. Making other changes would do more to smooth traffic than an expensive new underpass. It would lead to more widening, more traffic lights, more speeding. I don't have time to read all this to you, but I think the bottom line is that the challenge is really weaving together the rail traffic with the flow, with the city land use and traffic flows within the city. We want to be left with a city that we all love and we want to live in. And the solution is not increasing speed on a key residential arterial that is part of the Safe Routes to School and goes against the action that you just took last night on bicycle boulevards or at the bike improvements that hopefully you'll be making in the rest of the city. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Jason Matloff, to be followed by Richard, sorry if I'm not pronouncing this right, Paccrc, Adina Levin, and Rob Levitsky will be our last speaker before we come back to the council.
Thank you. So first of all, I wanted to thank the staff for doing what everybody's been asking, and I think they've been doing it, and this is a continuation, which is to bring in an impartial third party who is an expert in this field to come in and provide analysis to the best of their abilities, given their expertise. And given how much emotions there are, as we're residents and we're homeowners, and there is obviously a lot of emotion all around, it's important that we have this third party providing that impartial data. And the impartial data, again, confirms the concern being that there's significant home takes that would be required for these 2 options at Churchill, which I want to speak about. Specifically, I'd urge you to do as Councilman Scharf and I believe others have recommended, which is to take these off the table, to recommend to the council that we take these off the table for the reasons that city manager was recommending. $500,000, lack of focus, inability to get the city to be focused on specific options. The reason why is we have nearly 1,000 residents, 450 from our neighborhood, another, 300 from South Palo Alto, that are committed and signed a petition opposing eminent domain specifically, so that, overwhelmingly it should persuade us to take those options off the table. The second thing is, given the numbers now, we know that in addition to construction, these options would cost somewhere between $1/3 billion and $500 million to construct with the cost of eminent domain. We now have the data. Okay, just do the simple math. We know how much the construction is. We know how much eminent domain would roughly be. The citizens of Palo Alto are not going to accept a $500 million cost for a small 7-block residential road that is 500 yards away from Embarcadero. So please, I urge you to move this discussion forward to rational, pragmatic decisions that can solve this problem of east-west traffic. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Richard, if you could help me know how to pronounce your name properly, to be followed by Adina and Rob.
My name is Richard Paccrc, and I'm another 30-year resident of Palo Alto in the North Palo Alto area. So I am concerned with the proposals on the Churchill crossing and would urge the elimination of the two hybrid from further consideration, the two hybrid options. I don't live on Churchill. My property would not be directly impacted, but it would certainly be a tremendous impact on our neighborhood to see our neighbors lose their homes from what we've heard today. And just the visual impact, the noise impact of either raising the road beds to do the roads over the rail bed, over the rail track, or to raise the railroad track itself to go for the underpass. And I would encourage the elimination of that. I think the North Palo Alto group has given some interesting proposals for consideration, and I encourage the staff review to look at the options, not only for Embarcadero, but for maintaining some kind of bicycle path. 3 of my children went to Pali, crossed the rail tracks every school day for each of their 4 years, and we need to make sure that we have bicycle and pedestrian traffic allowed at Churchill or somewhere close by to allow neighborhood kids to get to Palo Alto High School safely. Thanks.
Thank you, and I'll just add that bike ped crossings are certainly something that we're contemplating, even if we do close Churchill to vehicle travel, and bike ped crossings are a small fraction of the cost of a vehicle crossing. So thank you for your comment. Moving on to Adina Levin and Rob Levitsky, and then we'll come back to the committee.
Good morning. So I want to separate the comments into some on the Palo Alto Avenue and then relating to Churchill. So with the Palo Alto Avenue, I'm going to speak as a resident of Menlo Park, and I think it was 16 to 17,000 drivers who use that. And I think that closing Palo Alto Avenue is going to be problematic and wouldn't be supporting that as a resident. And I think you would hear from people if that was on the table. With regard to the hybrid, having sat through Menlo Park's discussions and observed them, Menlo Park City Council members have been saying positively, we want to work with Palo Alto, we want to work with Palo Alto. So I would be optimistic about the opportunity to work with a mutual solution on that. On Churchill, I do think the city should estimate the 2%, like Nadia Naik said, and if that turns out to say, 10, 20, whatever a property takes, clearly you're hearing take that off the table. But if there is something viable there. Please keep fencing in there, because with electric poles and wires, that takes pretty dramatic looking fencing that people will react to. Lastly, with regard to if there is Churchill closure to cars, consider safe routes to town and country and other non-roadway widening options toward mobility there. I think that there's, we think about safe routes to school, but also think about how people get to other destinations, including even, looking broadly and looking at people coming over from the east. I think there's ways to look at addressing the traffic problem without widening roads. Thank you.
Thank you. We had a couple of items from the public speakers that I want to give staff and consultant. Oh, I'm sorry. My apologies, Rob. Thank you. Rob Levitsky.
Yeah, I want to say that I think we should take the hybrids off from Churchill. I don't want my friends to be losing any of their houses. In studying the matter, though, I think the 400 or so cars an hour that cross there need to go somewhere, and I think probably Greg's solution should be still on the table to keep it open. It'll be degraded somewhat, but that's what Menlo Park is doing. They're taking 2 of their 3 crossings and just leaving them open. They'll get worse. We can try to do it as safely as we can. We can probably put a bike bridge underneath either Churchill or Seal or whatever road works best to get the kids to Pally and back. And maybe some of the degradation might go from 400 or 500 cars an hour to 200 or 300, and maybe some of those we could find a route to get to Embarcadero. The underpass has the capacity in that one lane going east. We did 1,200 cars an hour yesterday, and most of the delay was just, it could handle more cars except the fact that the signals at Town and Country and Pally stopped the cars from entering underneath the underpass. So that's my 2 cents, and I hope we can keep that option, consider the option of keeping Churchill open in a degraded state. Thank you.
Thank you. There were a couple of questions that were raised. Mr. LeBrun had one. I don't know if staff and consultant want to address that one.
In the one regarding vertical clearance?
Yeah.
Yes. So I misspoke. An analysis we did on the hybrid, we use a 24.5 vertical clearance, but that is the criteria that is currently in the Caltrain, and the greater clearance is required because we have electrification now to consider. But the high-speed rail has a greater vertical clearance, and I believe it is 27.5 feet. But that is one of the first items of work that we'll be doing. Is we have a draft criteria that will be circulated to the technical to make sure that Caltrain is on board with the clearances that we are using, and the vertical clearance for roadways under Caltrans is 15.5 feet.
Thank you. And also, I just wanted to clarify, it wasn't in our packet, but from, in prior materials, the full definition of the CAX option, the Churchill Avenue closure, does include the language of potential, it says, improvement options include widening existing Embarcadero Road undercrossing, and I think that was part of the, that's really the language that we heard some people suggesting we also consider removing. I'm not going to weigh in on that yet. I want to hear from my colleagues first. I just wanted to highlight that that's the language that is in writing that has raised concerns around Embarcadero widening. So going to committee members, Greg, you first.
So I think there's a couple things on Palo Alto Avenue and a couple things on Churchill. There's some motions I want to make on Churchill, but I think I should go forward. I think the Embarcadero widening is an interesting issue, and I think the real question is how do we move traffic through there in a calm, way that works. And I think the real problem, frankly, and I hate driving through there, frankly, and I actually take Churchill to avoid it. I mean, to be honest, because it's the Town and Country backup. And, this is a serious issue, and I know, and I've asked your predecessor, I've asked Josh, and I just think we're not putting enough focus on how to fix that. And maybe there's no great solution, and maybe we should revisit the vote we took on a 5-4 about, I think it was to make that turn lane in Embarcadero. in the context of this, I think we should probably take out the language about widening the bridge. I don't think, the bridge causes some problems, and I think to say it causes no problems is not right. I know when I come the other direction, that if you try and turn from El Camino going down Embarcadero, when there's a heavy traffic, all those cars merge there. That's a mess there. I think it would be better if that was widened there, but I don't think we're going to do it. I don't think the community angst makes it worth it. I think there's a lot of other stuff. I also would bet it's fairly expensive to widen that bridge. So I think we should take widening the bridge off the table. I think it's a community distraction. But I do think we should look at making the traffic improvements around there to make Embarcadero work. I think people have laid out a lot of them. And I think that should be that and not get lost in the details about widening the bridge. So with that, I have the following motion on Churchill. I think we should eliminate the Churchill Avenue reverse hybrid, the Churchill Avenue hybrid, and we should eliminate the language about widening the bridge, but add language. Right, widening the underpass. But we should add language that says we need to look at improving the traffic flow in that area. And I don't know what that looks like.
Well, I think that's good. I would just point out, because it's, it's a couple years away, is once we have a preferred alternative, we'll be doing an EIR on all of these issues, and so all of these impacts and stuff will be identified, and, we'll be through alternatives discussion there too.
And then the final...
If I could just add one more point. So the bridges at the Embarcadero undercrossing are approaching 100 years old. They're going to need to be replaced, pretty soon. Typically, we would construct to modern standards, add bicycle lanes, widen sidewalks. It is important to note that the entirety of Embarcadero Road is 4 lanes, except for the undercrossing. So in all likelihood, we would want to look at, continuing that cross-section through the newly constructed bridge, even separate from this grade separation project. So I just wanted to put that out there.
So I agree with you, but I think that what I'm really trying to say is that if we're going to build a new bridge, let's have a community discussion about what that looks like. But that's a separate discussion about how big that is, what the lanes look like, and all that. And I'm not saying we should never do it. Don't take that. I'm saying that we are confusing that project with this, which is getting people on Embarcadero concerned, whereas I think that's a separate community discussion. And that's really all. And I don't take my motion of let's never do it, but let's engage the community and have a separate process where we talk about that bridge. We went through a process on the Newell Bridge, right? Because we're replacing that. And, there are probably a bunch of issues that come up on replacing the bridge. So anyway, the other thing I think I'd like to do on Churchill is separate out closing Churchill for study and partially closing Churchill. We already partially closed Churchill, you can't drive there between, what is it, Josh, 7:15 and you can't cross. Well, when we say close Churchill, I don't think any of us think that you shouldn't be able to make that left turn. That left turn onto Alma is probably the key thing for the neighborhood. That's how we get onto Alma. There is no other way, really, at rush hour. You can't make a left turn. It's impossible without going there. So I think we need to clarify that if there's confusion on that, and we need to have an option of a partial closure. So that's my motion. Is that clear to everyone?
I'll second it to move us forward. I think there might be amendments or questions about it, but...
Do you need me to restate it?
Yeah, I think you should probably clarify.
Let me just restate it. So, we eliminate the Churchill Avenue, well, let me just do it right. We recommend to council that we eliminate the Churchill Avenue reverse hybrid. We recommend to council that we eliminate the Churchill Avenue hybrid. We recommend that we break out the Churchill Avenue closure into Churchill Avenue closed and Churchill Avenue partial closed. And we recommend that we eliminate the language that says, what does it say there, Corey? You have it?
Widen existing Embarcadero Road undercrossing.
To simply look at improving the traffic flow through the Embarcadero underpass area.
Well, you don't think you need to add that. Just all your motion would be is to widen existing Embarcadero Road undercrossing, just to remove that language from CAX, right? Because all that other stuff is in there.
Is it in there already? I mean, is it? I thought it's not as broad as that. I thought it says a bunch of different things.
The full CAX language says Churchill Avenue crossing closed. Improvement options include widen existing Embarcadero Road undercrossing, add new traffic signals at Embarcadero Road ramps, build bike/ped crossing at Churchill Avenue, and/or build Seal Avenue bike/ped crossing to connect to Piers Park and Stanford Avenue Bicycle Boulevard.
So I think it's broader than that. I think it's look at how do we fix the traffic in that area.
So this idea has evolved through the process, and our intent with that is to not list an all-inclusive menu of options, but those are some of the things we would look at, as we analyze what the impacts of the closure of Churchill would be.
Right, I don't have a problem with looking at those impacts. I just don't want that to be the only things we look at. Right. What I want us to do is take a comprehensive look at that and say, how do we fix it?
So I think maybe the way the amendment could read is just to say, or that part of the motion could just say, remove option of adding lanes to Embarcadero undercrossing. And then everything else is still a possibility. We're just saying that we're not going to look at adding lanes to the Embarcadero undercrossing as part of the grade separation debate. I think that would capture what you're trying to say.
Well, I just wanted to remove the language and have broad language about look at a way to come with it. That's all.
Broader, simpler work, particularly at the committee stage, then you guys will
I don't understand.
Be revisiting this next week anyway.
Right, I don't understand. I don't want to micromanage Josh. I want them to go think about it and say, what's the best solutions here?
Yeah, I think that's what we wanted, is to have something broad, but you also did want to remove the widening of Embarcadero underpass.
Because it's specific.
Right, so you want to remove the specific.
I just want to remove it.
And open up everything else.
Correct.
Right. So how do you want to word that for David to capture in the motion?
Well, I would just say remove the language, and you've stated the language from that, and just add language that says, take a comprehensive look at the Embarcadero area.
So to clarify.
Chair Wilbach, would it be helpful if I read the motion as captured?
Yes.
Please.
Councilmember Scharf moved, seconded by Chair Wilbach, to recommend the City Council eliminate Churchill Avenue hybrid CAH option from consideration, eliminate Churchill Avenue reverse hybrid option from consideration, break out Churchill Avenue closure options into full closure and partial closure, remove widening Embarcadero Road from consideration, and study additional options for addressing traffic in the Embarcadero Road underpass area.
So it's not remove Embarcadero from consideration, it's remove the language in terms of grade separation.
So remove widening Embarcadero Road undercrossing from consideration.
Yes.
Do you want to speak to it?
Sorry, remove the language regarding widening the Embarcadero Road undercrossing from the description of idea CAX.
That's
correct. The full, yes.
Maybe you could just work with him to get that correct.
All right, while they're doing that, do you want to speak to your motion?
Yes. I think it's really important, given how much it costs to do a thorough analysis of these, to take those options off the table that make no sense. And, taking 44 homes or 14 to 22 homes really make no sense. And I think I was very moved by it. I forgot her name, but Monica, when she comes up and says that this hangs over our head. And this hangs over the sale of the properties, it hangs over people's lives, and it causes angst. And we need to basically take that off the table. And I felt similarly about that in terms of the rail context with the Embarcadero folks. Why would we create divisions like that seem unnecessary? And so I think that we should bring that back and move forward on that. And I also think it's really important to spell out that the partial closure option is a real option that might very well make a lot of sense, and we should study that. That's all I had to say.
I'm sorry, Councilmember and Chair, with your indulgence, for the purpose of just clarification for staff, by partial closure, do you mean closed at certain times of the day?
Yes.
Good.
Or maybe closed to certain directions. Basically, just not grade separating it.
Right, not grade separating it. And, you know, I mean, you're going to go through and do a thorough analysis of this, spend the money on the Churchill and say, hey, what is the best time? What's the best way to solve these problems?
Yeah, I'm happy to support the motion, open to amendments, or if people have, I know some committee members might want to break out certain parts of these. I'm happy to hear their concerns if they have any. I do think it's important not to take large numbers of homes for the project at Churchill in particular. I think that this motion moves us forward to being able to study a reasonable number of items in greater depth, have our consultant working with our staff to do that deep dive so that when we have our citizen groups, when we have our stakeholder meetings, when we have our community meetings, and when the council revisits this, you know, over the course of the next several months, we'll have more data from those deeper dives of those studied options that are worthwhile, and not spend a great deal of unnecessary money on options which we're very uncomfortable with. Any other comments from committee members? Lydia.
So I can't support the motion if you bunch them all together. I think that Embarcadero, the language over there, widening the underpass, does have to be looked at, especially if we're going to be looking at it down the line for what Josh had said, the 30 years thing. You know, if we're going to study the closing of Churchill, partial or full, we should be studying the circulation also at the Embarcadero widening. And I think if you're talking about comprehensive, then let's do it comprehensively and have a thorough traffic analysis on that site and all surrounding that area. So I totally support the hybrids being removed, except for the Palo Alto one. And most of your motion, except for the widening of the Embarcadero. I want to know about it.
So let me state it a little clearly. What was in my mind was that as part of the grade separation, we would not be studying that. At some point, Josh indicated they're going to need to bring back a replacement of the bridge, which is a whole separate cost structure, a whole separate community discussion, at which point there'll be discussions about what that bridge looks like. And I think I'm willing to be clear in this motion that we're not taking off the table widening, what would you call it, adding an extra lane through Embarcadero in that section, or an extra boring when the bridge is replaced.
Well, I don't want the traffic analysis when and if it's done. I think when is the better word, because I do expect that. I don't want the Embarcadero to be, and its neighboring streets to be excluded based on this language here. I want it to be fully included in the analysis for traffic circulation. And that's another important point. You know, we're not just looking at making sure that homes are safe and people are getting, you know, that we have to, mobility is safe. We want to make sure that circulation is there too. We have a problem in this city with circulation at this point. And I want to make sure that circulation is happening at the same time with safety. So removing Embarcadero, I don't want it to end up having it being removed from studies, et cetera. So I would, yeah, thank you.
If I could interject, Chair, members of the committee, as a part of the evaluation we will do for the grade separations, including the no project and closure options, there will be a traffic analysis. And that traffic analysis will look at all impacts, including impacts to Embarcadero, as a part of both the initial studies as well as ultimately the environmental.
And so because we have removed the language of widening the underpass, then the study might not look at the widening of it?
I think the primary implication of removing the wording is it's no longer part of the project description, which is an important distinction for the purpose of how we define the scope of the project and the cost estimation and the like. But for the purpose of environmental analysis, we're still going to need to look at impact, again, of Churchill on Embarcadero and what mitigation measures would be appropriate based on any impact identified.
Yeah, I still have concerns about that, so I really hope you consider separating it as a motion, because it's a deal breaker.
Okay, Adrian, do you have any comments?
I've got a lot of comments. Let me start at Palo Alto Ave, and I was going to say, you know,
I want to take care of this motion first.
I'm actually not going to address the motion right now. I've got some thoughts to work through. I was going to say, you know, gosh, Palo Alto Avenue looks easy because there's, you know, minimal takings. But I think Councilmember Koo raises a really good point that eminent domain, although scary, is not the only thing we should be considering, actually. And we have committed to a number of criteria to evaluate each of these, including things like circulation, safety, noise, aesthetics, et cetera. So eminent domain is not the only aspect we're looking at here. Quick question on the Palo Alto hybrid. What's the commercial property that's impacted, actually? Is it the Red Cross, or is it? That's a residential. Uh-huh.
It's an apartment building.
It's an apartment building that you couldn't build under current zoning to. Okay, so it's not commercial. Okay. That's interesting. Let me get back to my notes. Do any of the changes to the Palo Alto hybrid, do they affect the university station or potential future station planning there?
So the layout that's before you today would conform to the existing track alignment at the station. So the station platforms themselves would not be impacted.
And so that wouldn't necessarily preclude any station upgrades down the road?
Correct.
Okay. That's good to know. A couple other comments, just a few assumptions I've heard today, which I think are important to get out there. So one is, it was mentioned that this was designed, or at least at Churchill, and I'm assuming here at Palo Alto Ave too, that Alma's been designed for 25 miles per hour?
Sorry. I was just looking back at my notes. Alma was designed for 35 miles per hour.
What are these designs, though?
35.
Okay, so you're maintaining 35?
Yes, excuse me, I just re-looked at my notes. The other side streets were at 25, Churchill was at 25, Mariposa, but Alma was at 35.
Okay, excellent. That's the status quo. So I heard 25, and I was thinking, isn't Alma 35 right now? So that's helpful.
That part of Alma was 25.
As you approach Palo Alto Ave, I think it drops down. But by Churchill, it's 35, right? Yeah. Somebody did bring up a comment that we actually haven't considered yet, which is a one-lane underpass. And I don't want to go throwing a whole new monkey in the gears, but it does occur to me that that actually is something I've personally used many, many times in certain areas. Is there any, do we know like the range of difference? Just imagine if we did, a one-lane underpass at Churchill, if it's possible, does that mean, maybe it's only one or two takings? I'm just trying to get a sense here.
Well, so not assuming too much on, the residents' comments, but what I think was being proposed is an underpass that would begin before Alma, pass underneath Alma, and then come up on the Southgate side within the existing right-of-way. So in all likelihood, parking on both sides would need to be removed on Churchill to accommodate this, the entry to the undercrossing. I'm not quite sure if what's proposed is a signalized bi-directional one-lane undercrossing or just a one-way undercrossing that would provide travel in only one direction.
So that's interesting. I'm not going to make any amendments to ask you guys to go look at this, but just for the public, that's an interesting change, which, maybe we're trading parking spots for home takings, and I think most people would probably make that trade-off. On Churchill, I've been hesitant to remove the hybrids for a while because specifically I really wanted to see these maps. And now it's very clear that these maps are freaking out the city council, and that's exactly why I was asking for them. The question, though, is Councilmember Wolbach asked, we don't want to take a large number of homes, and I guess I would ask my colleagues more broadly, what is a large number? Is 1 a large number? Is 5, is 10, is 15, is 40? And that's what we're going to have to consider. Another question related to that on Churchill, if we close it, whether it's a partial closure or a full closure, and there are questions around what those look like, a bike underpass, that also may potentially involve closure or takings, correct?
We haven't done any analysis on that. There's different variations of what that would look like. It could be similar to the 1-lane undercrossing that we were just discussing, or it could be more similar to the Homer undercrossing.
Or we could extend it under Ulm and have a pop-up on this side of town.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways that could be laid out.
Okay, so we may want to get a bit of definition there, because I don't want us to say we're removing the Churchill hybrids because the takings are too large, and then come back and say we're interested in a bike ped tunnel, which is going to do some amount of takings. On the partial closure, we just mentioned one comment, which is it may be open at different times. What other ways could you do a partial closure? I mean, could you close it to cars and just allow bikes and peds across? I know that might be extraordinarily dangerous. I'm just trying to get a sense of what other types of partial closures are there.
It could be made one way. It could be closed to cars and only allow bikes and peds. It could be a part-time closure. I think there's a lot of different things we could look at moving forward.
Okay, so if we could flesh that out, that would be helpful. What was the last thing on this? I was just thinking of it. Last point here on Churchill. A number of speakers have brought up the 1%, 2% grade issue. And do we just have an idea, if, assuming we were able to get a 1.5, 1.75, or 2% grade permit, whatever you want to call it, from Caltrans and the board, what's our rough number of takings then, if the train is able to go down there?
It's not a linear reduction, because if we go from the 1% to the 2%, we at the 1% we were down about 6 feet. So as we got to Churchill, if we did 2%, I'd off the kind of a rough number, we may be looking at maybe a 20% reduction, but we'd have to run through the numbers again. It wouldn't be, because we've doubled the grade, increased the grade by 2. Yeah, it's not gonna reduce the number of property impacts to half that number. Okay. It'll be something, maybe a reduction of 20%.
Would we be able to run those numbers between now and next week, or is that a longer
ballpark?
I believe so.
Okay.
Okay, that would be helpful, just in terms of, I know there is this ongoing issue of course, we don't want to take homes at any of these, but if we're able to get a permission to do the 2% grade, it does reduce that volume by some amount, and that should be a tension we're willing to explore. So if we can get some ballparks on it, that's helpful. I still think the numbers might still be, cause for us to remove the Churchill hybrids. So the motion right now is to recommend to the council that we remove the Churchill hybrids and we explore either a partial closure or a full closure there. And then the a la carte items are the bike ped stuff. And then the motion is from Embarcadero to remove the options to widen it. So that's Embarcadero.
It's not to remove the option to widen. It's not to look at as part of this project.
David, can we put it up on the screen, please? So this is the last area I guess I want to focus on.
It's challenging for us to both type who's speaking and show you the same thing. So I can show you, but if you could, then I can take it down.
Be quiet. I'll be quiet for a moment.
That would be appreciated.
Thank you, David. So I'm a little tussled on this one. On the one hand, I know we added that language about exploring Embarcadero after hearing from a number of North Palo Alto folks, and then inevitably we've started hearing from folks in Professorville and that area in Embarcadero. I'm sorry you guys are actually not sitting next to each other either. And I'm a little concerned and not exactly sure what to do there. On the one hand, I know we did just actually pass recently a number of bike and ped improvements along Embarcadero, which will be underway, I think, later this year or early next year. And so we have things in flight. As Josh just mentioned, we may need to rebuild Embarcadero entirely in the next 10, 20 years, in which case, to me, it does seem to make sense to include some of those considerations in this plan. So I don't know, I'm not sold on that on the Embarcadero issue, and I don't know if we as a committee or as a council exactly know what we want to do there. And so I'm looking to my colleagues and to the city manager.
Let's take that out. You want to take it out? I'll take it out.
I'm not saying I want to take it out. Like I understand the concerns from Professorville neighborhood that they do not want a problem shifted from Churchill where we're moving hybrids to their neighborhood. Nonetheless, it seems that Embarcadero is an ongoing issue for us in terms of town and country, as you mentioned, in terms of Stanford, in terms of the bike and ped connections, in terms of the loops at Emerson and Kingsley. And so I'm looking for a little bit of help and more definition in defining what we do and don't want to do there. And I'm just a little imbalanced there.
I'm going to jump in for. So I think that there's a tension between wanting more definition versus wanting to keep it open. I think the idea of this motion is to keep it very open with one thing off the table when it comes to Embarcadero, saying that we're going to look at everything we can do to improve traffic flow, circulation, study the impacts of what this means for traffic flow through Professorville, Northwold, Palo Alto, et cetera, that we're going to study everything, consider everything. The one thing we're not looking at as part of our grade separation planning, if this motion moves forward and is recommended as accepted by council, would be, the one exception would be adding a road or widening the Embarcadero Road underpass.
So I guess just to respond there, I think you've touched on something important, which is when we rebuild Embarcadero, if we do, and we do continuous bike upgrades and neighborhood traffic calming measures, there may be some outcome where there are lane changes there and it could go to 4. I think that shouldn't happen though because of us removing the hybrids at Churchill. I think that's my pain point.
Right. And I think that's what this acknowledges, and Councilmember Sharf agreed earlier, and we heard from staff that, this is really the question is, do we want to try and solve all the issues around Embarcadero and the future of the bridge there as part of grade separation, or do we want to say that's a broader, separate, also thorny, complex question, and we should take it up after the grade separation
and punt it separately to someone.
I know Lydia wants to jump in on this.
So the last point, David, that was on the, in the motion, which is to, I think it was to remove it and then to have staff look at how to solve the problem, additional options for addressing traffic. So just that point alone has, I'm sorry, it wasn't that one. Right, so study additional options for addressing traffic in Embarcadero Road underpass area. Just there, I see just tying up, it doesn't allow for a comprehensive study just with that sentence alone. So the circulation is still a big issue over there.
What language would you like, Councilmember Koo?
I want it to be separated so that we can have further discussion at council, or even, I don't want to tie up. I think it's still, if you're going to have Churchill as a partial or full closing, I think Embarcadero deserves the same thing. It's an arterial street. It's an actual coming in from the 101, and it's used by a lot of businesses. And when Menlo Park closes their portions, and they only have one street that comes through, there's going to be a lot of traffic that's diverted into Palo Alto, and I see Embarcadero being one of it. And to close our eyes and to stick our heads in the sand and not really address that, I have great concerns.
So how would you like us to address it?
Yes, please.
So one thing is, as you're mentioning, the issue of like a circulation study and traffic as a network, And I think any of these options, we will be looking at that, and there are going to be knock-on effects where so far our previous circulation study, which is being redone, did have some things like if you close Churchill, traffic in Embarcadero goes up 15% or something like that. We have estimates from some of the neighbors saying, it's maybe 10%, some saying it's more. So whatever we choose, we will continue to evaluate those downstream effects.
So in that case, then, instead of removing the language, say, if we do not widen, the same language as you put in for Churchill, if we do not widen Embarcadero underpass, then what are they? It's the same language that you put for Churchill right now, right?
Yeah, but that gets back to the issue. So quick question to Josh. Why, when we started this grade separation process, right, connecting Palo Alto, why did we choose these four, right? East Meadow, Charleston, Churchill, Palo Alto. And why didn't we say we want to look at the Cal Ave bike underpass, and we didn't want to look at Embarcadero, and we didn't want to look at University or Oregon?
I think the project purpose and need is very clear. It's a direct reaction to the expected increase in train traffic and the safety and operational issues that will occur at those at-grade crossings.
Right. And so right now Embarcadero is not at grade.
So if I could maybe offer, so when we do the traffic analysis of what is going to happen if Churchill is closed, there will be some impacts that are identified that may or may not be on Embarcadero Road. I think it's that point where we need to have a discussion about what should be on the table and what shouldn't be on the table, because we don't even know if the impacts to Embarcadero will even warrant the addition of the fourth lane in the undercrossing. So maybe just change the language to state that mitigations will be identified through a discussion of a traffic impact analysis or something to that effect.
I think that's a little more fair to our process in terms of saying we're not exploring changing the grade separation at Embarcadero right now, but we expect that there could be impacts there which would need to be mitigated, and that would be a little more honoring where our process started, if that makes sense. Folks, I guess I'm asking you here, and my trouble is, are we removing Embarcadero from separation right now and recommending that? Or are we saying we keep it in and we continue to consider it? And then the third part, and I think this we should do no matter what, is whatever we choose at Churchill and Palo Alto Ave, we expect there are impacts at Embarcadero and other city streets, to be honest, that maybe aren't here today, where we may need to address some mitigations.
I'm not following you, Adrian.
Okay. So the reason Embarcadero is in here is we, a few weeks or months ago, chose to explore it, saying if we do this Churchill Avenue stuff, what about expanding it at Embarcadero, right? And we essentially went from 4 grade crossings to 5 in our Connecting Palo Alto project. And right now we're kind of debating, do we remove that option at Embarcadero? And yet Councilmember Koo, I think, does bring up good questions, that if we're removing the hybrids at Churchill today, or if we're talking about closure there are likely to be impacts in Embarcadero, which we should be willing to account for. And I guess what I'm kind of coalescing around is that we should remove Embarcadero from consideration as a grade separation in Connecting Palo Alto, because it's already grade separated. Nonetheless, as you've mentioned with Town and Country, as Councilmember Koo has mentioned with traffic circulation, we expect there could be significant impacts there, which we have to address as a separate down-the-road project, which honestly is kind of already in flight given the bike upgrades there. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think so.
So I think that the motion tackles this and it resolves this. So I think we could move forward. I think that the concerns I've heard from Councilmember Koo and Councilmember Fine are not going to be invalidated by this motion. I think that the problem stems from some of the detail language in the description of one of the options that dates back at least a couple of months that raised some real concerns among a lot of people in the community. And it's, that's actually one of the options that has more detail than some of the others. And staff has been saying tonight, they're actually trying to keep open general conversation, keep open a lot of options. And I think that just removing some of the overly precise language here in saying we still want to have an open conversation, gives us flexibility. But it also, having this in the motion, sends a clear signal that we're not looking to just shift the traffic from Churchill straight over to Embarcadero. And I think it's important that we send that message. That's why I support that Part D of the motion. But the Part E, which says, study additional options for addressing traffic in the Embarcadero Road underpass area, is also important. Again, there are mitigations which may be needed. Maybe we'll do additional bike underpasses. There are a lot of things we might look at. Maybe we change the middle lane in Embarcadero and the underpass. Maybe we change it to bi-directional, so it changes one time a day versus the other to accommodate people. There are a lot of different things we could do. Maybe we work with Town Country to change their driveways so people can get off Embarcadero more smoothly. And so I think all those options are possibilities. And those are all captured by this motion, and doing careful study of the impacts of the Churchill potential closure is also captured by what we heard from staff. So I don't think we're going to stick our heads in the sand, but it's an important thing to be thoughtful of. So I would encourage people to support the motion or to offer very specific amendments.
Should we vote?
Okay, before we vote, we're going to go back to the public. Everybody, you'll have only 2 minutes on this one. You don't have to use your whole 2 minutes. Roland, Roberto.
Do you want to go back to the public on this? Because I think there's some changes on the Palo Alto. I think there's a simple motion we need to make about breaking out the viaduct and the hybrid into two separate.
We're going to let people speak to any parts of this they want to discuss. We're not taking any more comments on this at this time. Roland, Roberto, Nadia, Parag, and Dina Levin. Actually, I'll just say, by the time Roland is done speaking, we will not take any more cards.
So very briefly on Churchill and Embarcadero, one thing you have to consider, if you close Churchill first, you've got to consider how you're going to be able to actually perform work on Embarcadero later. Because potentially you may have to close Embarcadero to actually perform the work. So you have to consider that, the sequence, the phasing. But the thing I really wanted to talk to you about is, well, first of all, thank you for the answer. This is very, very helpful. And I'll give you an example. A train that goes between London and Brussels, we should actually use 5 different catenary heights because they got different clearance. The highest clearance actually in the Channel Tunnel. And let me give you another example where things can go seriously wrong when you start talking about tunnels. In San Francisco right now, talking about 2 tunnels. Each one is 1.3 miles. The first one is $900 million. The next one is $4.7 billion. And you ask yourself, my God, how is that possible? Because they just have this criteria that does not take a context into account that's saying you need 28 feet. That's a 200-mile-an-hour tunnel. Why do you need a 200-mile-an-hour tunnel as you're crawling into the Transbay Terminal at 25 miles an hour? The end result is that they eliminated an alternative. So in closing, my recommendation to AECOM is very simple. They're a global company. They've got hundreds of experts. When there's an issue like this, get the top subject matter expert in the company and provide them with guidance. Thank you.
Thank you, Roland. Roberto, Nadia.
So 2 things. So one of them is I'd forgotten at the prior visit to the mic to ask about raising or lowering the platforms at Cal Ave. It seems like raising or lowering the platforms there would drastically change the equation at Churchill, especially at the grade percentages. And then I also wanted to expand on Councilmember Fine's line of questioning and reverse this a little bit and say, what are the design constraints under which there would be no home takings? Is it 2%, 3%, 5%? Raise it by, raise Cal Ave? What is that? I think that would define the envelope for everybody much more fully and make it much easier for us to understand. Thank you.
Nadia? Be followed by Parag.
So I won't go into technical details, but I would be happy to forward along. There have already been design exemptions from high-speed rail on the height of those catenaries that already exist, so I will forward those along so that you could take a look at them. So echoing what Roland said, I know we're working on just what the written standard is, and this is just preliminary, and so this might get better. But I am worried that we're eliminating things before we know what that better alternative is because we've got some bad assumptions, right? So the reason you have this problem of Embarcadero is frankly because of your own circulation study. The circulation study that was done by Mott MacDonald specifically said that there would be no impacts if you close Churchill if you widen the Embarcadero grade separation. That's where this conversation actually stems from. So I would go back to the fact that, to their point, we're going to have some more analysis related to traffic, but a couple of things to keep in mind. The district school buses live at 25 Churchill. So in closing Churchill, you actually are now going to cause all those school buses to go in a different route. I talked to some council members that apparently years ago there was some conversation about potentially moving the district site for where they keep their buses to East Palo Alto, because actually most of the drivers are from East Palo Alto. They come over to get the buses and then they go back to East Palo Alto to pick up the kids over there. So that might be something to think about in terms of having some flexibility when it comes to circulation. Another issue that you need to concern, I don't know where you'd place that. I know I see Ed holding his head, but I'm just throwing that out there is that, when we look at circulation, these are some issues. The other thing is the emergency vehicles. There was a lot of interesting numbers and data around what roads the emergency vehicles are currently using. And to Roland's point, you have to also look at if you're doing something at one grade step, are you potentially having to close another, and how is the construction impacts of this change how we might have to look at different things at the same time, especially if we do have to rebuild the bridge for whatever reason. At that point, if you're so close and you have to shut it down, do you then also just rebuild the bridge? And I don't know whether it's wider or not. I'm just stating that kind of order of operations matters. So thank you.
Thank you, Nadia. Parag, and our last speaker on this is Adina Levin.
Yeah, I just had two quick questions. One is, when will options be discussed for the South Palo Alto intersections, because all the conversation here has been around Churchill and Palo Alto only. So that was my first question. The second question is, I'm assuming we just get in touch with the city manager here and nominate one person from the South Palo Alto community for the community advisory panel. I don't know what the process is, but I'm assuming we just send an email to the city manager. And also to reiterate, we have, I know our city manager was not here, and so were the AECOM folks not here the last time, but we have about 342 signatories to our petition for the South Palo Alto intersections. We probably have the highest density of intersections per capita in suburban, Silicon Valley. And we wanted two things. We wanted no raised options, no raised rail, no raised road. We are very adamant about it. Only, our motto there is bury the rail. Put it underground, trench or tunnel, and then no eminent domain whatsoever. So anyway, reiterating the same 2 points that I made last time. But yeah, if you could answer those two questions I have, that'll be great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Adina Levin.
Thank you, Adina Levin. So first of all, thank you very much for the quick napkin level assessment of the impact of a 2% grade that it is, likely not a linear relationship to property takes and having something written down, because I think that, 40 taking of homes answers the question, and 20 taking of homes also answers the question. And for comparison, when Menlo Park was looking at options that might have had property impacts, there were a couple of property impacts that would have been shaving a driveway or moving a driveway over, but there was nothing that involved eliminating a home. So thank you for doing those calculations and then bringing it to council, to the community, to make the obvious answer obvious. And then secondly, also thank you for the recommendation to change. So the language around Embarcadero to studying circulation and mitigating impacts, because jumping to the conclusion you're going to mitigate the impacts and therefore you're going to rebuild the bridge and widen the road is very far jumping to a conclusion and saying that circulation impacts will be addressed and mitigated is a fairer way to do that than to, basically pick a mitigation out of a hat. So thanks for moving that forward.
Thank you very much. And just before we vote, so I want to make sure I understood the questions from Paccrc. One is about when we're going to talk about South Palo Alto. Staff did not bring us any options yet about eliminating any of the South Palo Alto options further than we've done so far. They did look at just these three that they already had concerns about regarding eminent domain takings and some other challenges, and so that's been the focus of this discussion, and that's the new information that we have now that we didn't have at our last meeting, and so that's why we're only really looking at removing some of the ones in the North Palo Alto area, just because we have new information on those. We don't have new information about the South Palo Alto ones yet, and so we're not proposing any changes to what to study in South Palo Alto, but certainly once we have more information, we've done those studies and get these community groups and stakeholder meetings going, that's going to be where we can further eliminate and get closer to consensus on the preferred solution. And then also about joining the stakeholder group, that was our prior item, and you can definitely connect with city staff to talk about what that process will look like as we continue to develop it. So any other comments before we vote? Lydia?
So when you come back to the council, will you have more of the bullet points that you mentioned on each of these options in terms of how many homes are going to be taken? I mean, how many properties might need to be taken? All the bullet points so that it's right here instead of us having to scramble to write it down?
Yeah, we'll include a narrative that will describe all of the impacts and, the layouts and how they were developed.
Right, so it's more visual. It really helps rather than just hearing and retaining. And thank you.
All right, all in favor of the motion? Aye. Okay, so 3 in favor, all opposed? 8, so that passes 3-1 with Councilmember Koo dissenting. Okay, so that resolves item number 2. We'll now move on to item number 3, which is informational item, VTA Measure B Grade Separation Funding Plan. And then we'll move on to item 4, Caltrain Business Plan.
Yeah, if I could ask Ed to update you, at least partly based on some of the staff-to-staff meetings we've been having at the city manager level.
Sure, be happy to. Really related to item number 3, perhaps just as long as we're on it, item number 4 is simply a status report, the ongoing discussions at Caltrain or the Joint Powers Board regarding their upcoming business plan, and council members Scharf and Fine both on the local policymaker group. With respect to item number 3, the Measure B grade separation funding allocation, I would note that we have had some initial discussions among city managers from Mountain View and Sunnyvale, as well as Palo Alto, and I think it is worth noting for the council that there is really not alignment in terms of how the funding allocation would proceed. So we do expect that there will need to be some ongoing, more detailed discussions. In that vein, it may be helpful if the Rail Committee ultimately wants to recommend the council identify a representative to participate among the elected level in those discussions, given that Mayor Nis would not be participating directly in that. So for council's consideration.
All right, any questions or comments from committee members on this?
Yeah, so
Great.
What I just heard you say is there is not alignment between how these money is distributed.
Correct.
Because I think what I heard from a member of the public was that this was resolved. So what you're saying, it's not resolved, and that the money could still be taken from us.
That is correct.
So that would imply that we need to move forward continually for two reasons, is that when people have their shovel-ready grade separations, they're going to try and take the money for their grade separations.
Yeah, if I was not at the city manager meeting. I was enjoying that nice tour that I had of Stanford Hospital. I would just say...
Really appreciate you going above and beyond to try out the new hospital, Jim.
Yeah, well, it's the things I subject myself to.
And you were healthy before you went.
So here's the point. I'd say generally, I mean, in particular, I mean, Sunnyvale staff is not in agreement with where we are. And therefore, the three jurisdictions not being in agreement makes it easy for VTA to, add to the fact that, there's not a rush for them to sort of make a decision as to what to do for things to be paused or whatever, So I do think Ed's comment that this is something at the elected level, I think we've got to look at a way to, to move on, because I don't think at this point we can count on our assumptions at the moment, So we've got to get that cleared up.
Lydia, yeah.
I just want to say that on this report, if you could convey to Councilmember McAllister our thanks for his leadership in terms of our cut, based on the grade separations and giving it to us 50%. So that's really appreciated on our side. So if you would convey that message, I'd really appreciate that.
Be happy to do that.
Yeah. So was staff looking for us to make a recommendation to the council about somebody to appoint, or we're just going to encourage the mayor to appoint somebody, or do we want to appoint somebody as a committee? What was it? What was your recommendation?
Well, we had these things listed
person
as information items, but I mean, Ed is suggesting, that you ought to look at this. You can have a...
It might be as informal as the mayor designating a member to participate in discussions.
Is the mayor able to do that on that level?
I don't think the mayor is going to be recused from being able to make an appointment of a council member on this. It's different than something else. I just in case anybody is not aware, Councilmember McAllister is from Mountain View and is the BTA rep for sort of the North County sort of consortium or subcommittee. That's and recently you folks had a meeting with those. With the consortium, or we had representatives.
Yeah, and that's our group in North County, and that
is correct. Mayor Niss actually participated in that on VTA issues more broadly, and I think it was acknowledged that this issue is one in play that involves not only North County, given that Sunnyvale is actually considered part of the, is it West or some other sector, and has different representation.
Yeah, the North County is for everybody's information, it is Palo Alto, Mountain View, Los Altos, and Los Altos Hills. All right, we have one speaker on this item, Nadia Nayak.
Thanks. So I thank you, Greg, for the clarification about Sunnyvale. I think it's super important. As I have been saying for a while now, we need to be lobbying. We need to be lobbying. We haven't had a conversation about our lobbyist, right? Other Sacramento lobbyist coming to a future rail committee meeting, but I think we need to be doing it. And I would recommend, if it's possible for Mayor Niss to appoint someone quickly, great. Otherwise, I would recommend that we try to put this as an item on the agenda for the special city council meeting you're having on the 19th. The packet hasn't actually gone out yet, so you might as well be able to amend the packet and put on there that you nominate someone to make sure that we're lobbying on this issue. Because obviously it's important, and it's something that you guys have been working on for a while, and I think there's clearly opportunity for movement, and it's important to understand why is Sunnyvale objecting? What is the real reason that's going on to understand? My understanding is I think they have two crossings. I believe they're trying to close one. So what's the deal? But we need to be involved. We need to be participating more regionally. And this is part of what we've been advocating for a while, which is let's elevate the conversation, and to the extent that, again, we could have a lobbyist that's working at the state level to help us understand what other possibilities there are to use the Measure B money to get access to it faster and to leverage it, that would be super helpful.
All right, so does staff think that we need to have a special item add to the packet, or do you think this is something we can take up during the discussion?
Handle this. Yep.
Yep, great. And I'll also echo that there's actually something that I thought agreed several months ago was going to be
We'll try to have that report, though, at your next meeting.
Great, thank you. And I know tomorrow is when late packets go out for next Monday. I'll just add also that there is one item that we'd established would be a regular appearing item, I thought, on our agendas, which had to do with, I can't remember the exact wording we used, but something like intergovernmental
legislative update or legislative matters.
Basically intergovernmental. Right, so as kind of a catch-all, so that if we wanted to talk about things like lobbying efforts, that would be a standing item on our agendas. I would recommend that reappear on our agendas, and I'll just use this opportunity to say that I agree that we should be engaging with our lobbyists.
Got it. Lost in translation.
Yeah, on
Thanks.
funding. And we actually talked about this in our motion when it was at council in May. So I won't repeat those points. Thank you. Any other comments or questions on this item, or should we move on to item 4? Very good. Moving on to item number 4, Caltrain business plan.
No further report.
Okay, this is informational.
I have a question.
So Lydia has a question, and then we also have a member of the public to speak to item number 4.
Can you explain to me the local policy makers group? How did that come about? And I know. Yes. So what do they do?
This was a creation of Caltrain, effectively, and so they've asked for a single representative from each of the cities along the Caltrain corridor. And so this is a group that gets together monthly. Over the last year or so, it had been alternating its monthly agenda between high-speed rail and CalMod, the electrification project. But at this point, Caltrain has suggested that they'll go to more of a regular monthly agenda, that they would be more actively focusing on the business plan.
And there's nothing to report from this group?
It actually meets next week.
Okay.
Nothing new other than what we've already have in front of us.
All right, Adine 11 to speak to item number 4.
So Adine 11, Friends of Caltrain, reporting on a couple of updates relating to the Caltrain business plan. First of all, that the process is now fully funded and moving forward, so there is to be expected a significant amount of community and stakeholder process around the decisions that Caltrain would be making about its future post-electrification service infrastructure requirements and other things. And one of the things that the board approved direction of at their last board meeting is a component feeding into that business plan is a transit-oriented development policy framework and toolkit. And that is something that, that they're looking at ways of identifying land that Caltrain owns that is, 1, essential for running the railroad, 2, that could be the potential for transit-oriented development. They've identified a few pilot cities to help work out their approach, Palo Alto being not one of them, which I think is reasonable given the pace that they're working on and the pace that Palo Alto would be. However, the policies that Caltrain develops for transit-oriented development has the potential to be extremely relevant for a number of the city's goals, or could be. And therefore, I would encourage the city of Palo Alto to, a city staff and community to be paying close attention to the development of those policies such that there are options on the table and frameworks on the table that make sense for the city of Palo Alto. And that is my comment, to pay attention to their TOD policy and TOD toolkit. Thank you.
Thank you. Roland LeBrun is our final speaker on this item.
So I don't know if you've been following this, but even though we're going to get all these electric trains and everything else, and where conventional wisdom would say if you have 5 trains and you add 1 train, you're going to increase capacity by 20%. We're actually going to lose capacity. So at some point, Caltrains are going to have to start doing some kind of capacity planning. And I just want to give you some forward thinking of where this might be going. We all know that running more trains is not going to work until we've got full grade separation in the peninsula, because we're going to shut the peninsula down. So the only solution is essentially to have longer trains capable of carrying 2,000 passengers, because we have to be realistic. Between now and the time trains may open, which is going to be less than 10 years from now, we have to double the capacity of the corridor. So the proposal I'm making is to focus on baby bullets and the baby bullet stations, and to have double-length platforms in the station. So it's a 1,400-foot platform, and either side of it, as you're flaring out, you get 100 feet. So now you're talking about last station, approximately 3,000 feet. And in closing, that brings us to the discussion that you had earlier about Stanford. If you move Stanford north and you really start thinking about what you want to do in Palo Alto and having a massive station in it, you have potentially got an opportunity to combine both stations into one. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions on this item? If not, okay, we'll wrap that up. Moving on to future meetings and agendas. Anything from staff on that?
Actually, your meeting calendar has gotten ahead of us, so maybe we'll get through next week, and then we'll come back to that.
All right, thank you. Meeting is adjourned.
Well, I mean, right now, we have to go with, of course, yeah, we can always, a variance process is always,
But just to show that there's a precedence for some of the stuff that they're doing. Great.
Are you Eileen? Oh, sorry.
No, this is not Eileen.
no, Eileen left already. She left at 10. She'll be back on Tuesday night.
Oh, okay, all right.
But yeah, to the extent that there's design variances